Part 26. The Rebirth of Space, the Lucky Girl from a Farm Family. Author, He Would Fire Every. Chapter 251. Chapter 251. Let's wait and see. Ruhi nodded. Indeed, how can ordinary people survive after being poisoned by such a serious poison as curare? Just as Luzikin was about to speak, the porter came in and said, "Sir, the second master is here." Luzikin said with great disgust, "What did he do here?" Guhwayu stood up and said, "Luzigzun has seen me, so I went to the next door to take shelter." Luzikin nodded. "If you're bored, read a book to pass the time." After saying that, he turned to Ruhi and said, "Take Xiao to the study." "Master, please follow me." Ruhi turned around and walked to the study. Guhwayu followed Ruhi to the study room. As soon as Guhwayu left, Luzigzun stepped into the threshold and saw Luzikin lying on the bed dying. "How is it? Are you feeling better?" Luzikin glanced at Luzigzun, who was carefree, and replied weakly, "Nothing, I can't die." Looking at the person who is usually aloof and never takes him seriously, lying on the bed and letting him ridicule him, Luzigzun's mood suddenly improved. Walking to the bedside, Luzigzun stretched out his feet and kicked the brocade stool, sat down, and said with a bit of schadenfreude, "How does it feel to lie down? Do you enjoy it?" Luzikin saw that he looked like a villain and said, "It's okay. Do you want to try it?" Luzigzun waved his hand, "Forget it, I can't enjoy this kind of blessing." After finishing speaking, Luzigzun turned to look at Rugju and Ruhin and said, "You guys are all good at talking and boasting. When something happens, you can't protect the master, so what use are you?" Rugjuan and Ruhi stood by the side with their hands hanging down, their eyes looking at their noses, and their noses looking at their hearts, letting Luzigzun scold them. Although they are people under Luzikin, in the British government, Luzigzun is the second master and the master. If they dare to talk back, they will be doing the following and being disrespectful. Luzigzun's eyes turned back and forth on Rugju and Ruhin and asked, "Which of you went out with Zikin yesterday? You or you?" Aryu Yan leaned forward and said, "Back to the second master, he is the younger one. It's all my fault that the younger one didn't protect the sixth master well." Luzigzun stood up, shook his folding fan and walked to Aryujin. He closed the folding fan in his hand and poked Aryujin's shoulder with the folding fan. "Yesterday you were by Ziqin's side, but Ziqin was hurt. You should know what's the crime." Ruhen's body swayed back and he lowered his head without saying a word. When Luzigzun saw that Aryujin was silent, he raised his hand and pushed him, and said in a deep voice, "You are mute. What do I want to say to you?" Rishi then took 2 steps back. Luzikin said, "Second brother, Ruhin is my person." Rug bowed and said, "The young man did not protect his master well and deserves to be punished." Lvzikin and Aryujin said at the same time. Luzigzun ignored Luzikin's stop. He had long wanted to teach these guys under Luzikin. If he could take the opportunity to send these guys out, it would be perfect. Raised his hand and slapped Aryu Yan, "You still know that you are not protecting the Lord well? You." "Stop," Luzikin shouted loudly. Luzigzun raised his hand and wanted to turn it back, but when he heard Luzikin's voice, he was frightened and stopped. Rugjuan looked at Luzikin and saw that Luzikin was covering the wound with his hand and stopped Luzigzun with a painful voice. Upon seeing this, Rugjuan quickly stepped forward and helped Luzikin sit up, leaning against the head of the bed. Luzigzun pointed at Ruju and said to Luzikin, "How do you still protect such a person who doesn't protect his master well? Luzikin, are you mentally ill? What will you do if you don't kill this guy with a stick?" Luzikin said slowly, "He is my person. How to deal with him is my business and has nothing to do with you." Luzigzun clicked his tongue several times and said, "I have seen through it all, you are just an ignorant person. I will teach you a lesson. If you are not grateful, forget it, but you still think my hand is stretched too long." I don't care about your business. Luzikin raised his head slightly, forget it this time. Next time, if you reach out to my people again, try it. After saying that, Luzikin didn't want to talk to him anymore, so he said, I'm going to take a rest. Please come back. Luzigzun saw Luzikin's order to expel guests, and sat back on the brocade stool with a playful smile. Isn't he just a servant? Don't be angry. I just arrived, and we haven't even said a few words, and you drove me away. How bad it would be. We haven't had a good conversation in a few days, so it's time to talk more today. Don't hurt the friendship between brothers for the sake of a servant. After Luzigzun finished speaking, without waiting for Luzikin's reply, he turned to look at Rugjuan. I've been here for a long time, and you don't even serve me tea? There's no etiquette at all. Rugjuan looked at Luzikin and saw that Luzikin was silent, so he stepped forward and poured a cup of tea for Luzigzun. Lvzigzun took it and took a sip, and said with a sigh, if you ask me, when a young man does things, there is no maid who is as careful and thoughtful as possible. You should add some maids to your yard. It would be much more comfortable to have maids at your side than to serve as a servant. Zigzun, how about I have someone send you a few tomorrow? How about ensuring that you have a beautiful face and a slim figure? Luzikin replied angrily, no need, you can keep it for yourself. Luzigzun looked at Luzikin, leaned forward, and whispered, there are rumors outside that you are inhumane, but is it true? Luzigzun is particularly excited today, constantly testing and challenging Luzikin's bottom line. He just wants to see him get angry. Luzikin glanced at Luzigzun and said calmly, do you think I will be angry because of a few shameless words from a shameless person? If you think so, then you are wrong. I have always laughed at the behavior of shameless people. Just like I am now, do you understand? Luzigzun thought his words would anger Luzikin, but he didn't expect that Luzikin didn't take the bait at all. Lvzigzun has never been as good as Luzikin in terms of verbal skills. Luzigzun looked at Luzikin's disdainful smile, his teeth itched with hatred, but he was unwilling to do so. His eyes fell on the gauze wrapped around Luzikin's chest, and he continued, you said, you, the legitimate son of the British Duke, are you embarrassed by someone's cold arrow? You have wiped out the face of the Duke. The legitimate son of a military general would be looked down upon if he was not proficient in martial arts. Luzigzun thought he had touched on Luzikin's pain point. Luzikin raised his eyebrows and replied, it's really embarrassing. I'm embarrassed to stay in the Duke's mansion, but the British Duke doesn't allow me to leave. Otherwise, I would have followed my grandmother and the others back to Chinquo's mansion yesterday. If you can persuade the British Duke to release me back to the Chinquo palace, I will be grateful. Luzigzun blurted out, Lvzikin, do you want to lose face? Your surname is Lu, and you have been working in the Duke Chinquo's house all day long. Are you embarrassed? Don't forget, the surname of the Duke Chinquo's house is Yet. Luzikin said, what's wrong with me? My grandmother doesn't dislike me. If you can persuade the British Duke to let me go back, how about I give you 50,000 taels of silver? I know you have been short of money recently and have a lot of gambling debts. I am a brother enough to worry about your worries and think about what you want. Luzigzun looked at Luzikin in shock and asked in disbelief, you ask someone to check me? Luzikin smiled and said, are you in a hurry? No need to be in a hurry, I won't tell the Duke. Also, the questions must be accurate. Check you. You think too highly of yourself. There is no need to investigate the bad things you do outside, someone will bring them to me. How about it? Is this a good condition? You can earn 50,000 taels of silver just by talking. Where can you find a bargain with no capital and huge profit? Luzigzun looked at Luzikin in shock. He didn't listen to a word of Luzikin's next words. I just thought, if Luzikin knows, does his grandfather know? If grandfather knew about it, how would he punish himself? Also, how much does Luzikin know about him? Asked, what else do you know? Luzikin looked at the short-tempered Luzigzun and said calmly, I know everything I want to know. What? Are you nervous? Are you afraid that I will tell the truth to the Duke? Luzikin's ambiguous words made Luzigzun even more uneasy, and he said impatiently, tell me, what do you really know? Luzikin looked at Luzigzun who was spinning around in the room and asked, besides gambling, what else have you done? Luzigzun stopped and turned to look at Luzikin, are you deceiving me? After speaking, he raised his finger and pointed at Luzi and said, I'm warning you, you'd better keep your mouth shut, otherwise. Lvizikin raised his head and asked, what else? What do you want to threaten me with? What leverage do I have in your hands? I can make you threaten me. Ever since I was little, when have I ever been afraid of you? Luzigzun, please remember this for me. You are not qualified to speak loudly in front of me, and you cannot threaten me. It is important for people to be self-aware. Understand? The door is over there. Go back and tuck your tail between your legs and be a human being. Goodbye. No, you'd better avoid wherever I am. Otherwise, when I see you, I may think of what you did and I can't help but spill the beans. Luzigzun stared at Luzikin as if he were a stranger. In the past, Luzikin would give him the respect he deserved no matter how displeased he was. The Luzikin in front of him treated him not only with indifference but also with a bit of hostility. Seeing that Luzigzun was silent, Luzikin asked, what? Didn't you understand? Luzigzun glanced at Luzikin and said, what are you dragging? What do you have to drag? When Prince Yen's palace and Wang Xiang's palace are married, and the prince marries Miss Wang San, do you think the prince will still care about you? Just because you are seeking to divorce the king because of a village girl, will the king tolerate you? There are still many days to come, let's wait and see who laughs last. After saying that, Luzigzun walked away with a puff of his sleeves. Gu Huayu leaned against the door frame of the study room and looked at Luzikin with a smile. Luzikin smiled and asked, what are you standing there giggling at? Gu Huayu said, the world says that Mr. Lulu is cold, aloof, and not good at speaking. It seems that the world has misunderstood you. Luzikin waved to Gu Huayu and said, Xiao, come here, don't stay so far away from me. I'm a patient, don't let me talk to you at the top of my lungs. Gu Huayu came over and Rugjuan Ruhin retreated outside the house consciously. Gu Huayu asked, the wise king wants to marry Miss Wang San. Luzikin reached out to hold Gu Huayu's hand and said, it should be. Do you know why the Duke sent someone to take me and my mother back to the British government? Gu Huayu shook her head, I don't know. Why? Luzikin said, after the incident between my second uncle and Xiren, the emperor neither saw the empress nor the prince. Gu Huayu said clearly, so that's it? Did you enter the palace a few days ago? Luzikin nodded and said, I went. Your Majesty went with me, and your Majesty also went there later. Which position did King Xian marry Miss Wang San for? Luzikin nodded and said, that's right. It's none of our business, so let's not talk about it. Let's talk about something else. Did it go well for you to enter the palace today? At noon, the ladies who entered the palace to attend the flower party returned to each mansion one after another and told the people around them what happened in the palace. The dispute between Princess Yanran and Wang Piyun and Kui Xinyi was widely rumored. Kui Shangshi's wife, Mingxi, was so angry that she was shaking with anger after hearing the maid's story. She ordered people to prepare a car and went to the Prime Minister Wang's mansion to find her eldest sister-in-law, Kuishi. When Mrs. Ming arrived at the Prime Minister's mansion, Mrs. Kui was taking Wang Piyun to complain to Mrs. Shang Guan in Anfu Hall. Hearing that Mrs. Ming was coming over, Mrs. Shang Guan said to Mrs. Kui, go and greet her. The Prime Minister is about to leave the office, and I will not receive Mrs. Ming today. Kui Shifu stepped down and took Wang Piyun out of Anfu Hall. Wang Piyun looked back at Anfutang and asked, "Auntie, what does grandma mean? She won't leave her daughter alone, right?" Mrs. Kui replied, "You are her granddaughter, how could she ignore you?" Wang Piyun said, "My aunt is here now, she must be looking for my mother for today's matter, but why doesn't my grandma see my aunt?" Mrs. Kui looked at Wang Piyun and said, "You can see that your aunt is here for this matter, how could your grandmother not see it? The reason why your grandmother is missing is that she is missing. I will talk to your aunt later. You don't have to stay around. Go back to your own yard. Understand? Why do you want to take away your daughter? Can't your daughter listen?" Wang Piyun asked. Mrs. Kui said, "When the adults talk, what do you children listen to?" Wang Piyun nodded in agreement. The mother and daughter arrived at the second gate and welcomed Mrs. Ming to Yewan, while Wang Piyun returned to her own yard. Mrs. Ming and Mrs. Kui talked together for more than half an hour, and then Mrs. Ming stood up and left. In Anfu Hall, Mrs. Shangguan waited for Mr. Kui and Wang Piyun to leave. She raised her head to look at the hourglass and told Aunt Yang, "When the Prime Minister returns to the house, ask someone to come and report." Mother Yang bowed down and ordered her to go down. Not long after, a servant came in and reported, "Old madam, the Prime Minister has returned to the house and is coming to the backyard." Mrs. Shangguan quickly got up and walked out, "Follow me to greet the Prime Minister." The old lady of Shangguan and her maid came to the moon gate. When they saw the king in official uniform, they couldn't help but be startled and stepped forward to greet him. "Master Prime Minister." Wang Xiang nodded slightly and said warmly, "Why are you coming out? Is there something wrong?" Old Madame Shangguan glanced at Aunt Yang, who stopped the maid and asked Madame Shangguan and Wang Xiang to go forward, while she followed at a distance with everyone. Mrs. Shangguan didn't reply to the Prime Minister's words, but asked, "The Prime Minister came here without changing his clothes when he returned home. Is there something wrong in such a hurry?" The Prime Minister turned his head to look at the old lady Shangguan, with a joyful expression on his brows, "Your Majesty, I will leave you here today to ask about the marriage of the three girls." Mrs. Shangguan's eyes lit up, and she asked happily, "The wise king has gone to ask the emperor? What does the emperor mean? Are you willing to grant marriage to the wise king for our third girl?" End of this chapter. The Rebirth of Space, the lucky girl from a farm family. Author, he would fire every. Chapter 252. Chapter 252. The Prime Minister nodded, "Yes, Your Majesty has asked me to come down to talk today, just to ask if I am satisfied with this marriage." Mrs. Shangguan asked hurriedly, "Is Mr. Prime Minister ready?" The Prime Minister nodded again, "Yes, the wise king has become more and more stable in the past 2 years. If the third girl marries you, she will be fine in the future." Mrs. Shangguan nodded, "This is a great event, but we haven't told the third girl yet, Mr. Prime Minister, do you think?" Mrs. Shangguan knew that her granddaughter's thoughts were on Lulu, and she was worried that her granddaughter would do something stupid if she found out. Wang Xiang suppressed the smile on his face and said, "As things stand now, this is the best destination for her. Sister Yun has always been aware of current affairs and is sensible. She should know what to do." With that said, Wang Xiang turned around and ordered, "Go and send the third lady over." Mianer bowed her body and bent her knees, then turned and walked out of the courtyard. Wang Piyun went to Anfutang and listened to his grandfather's words. It only took a moment for Wang Piyun to go from shock to resistance, and then from resistance to acceptance. "Since you can't marry him, isn't it the same as marrying someone else? Besides, marrying a noble prince is 1,000 times better than marrying a child of a noble family. Even if that little is a princess given by the emperor, he will still have to pay tribute to her when he sees her as a princess. In the future, if the wise king ascends to the throne, then she will be the empress of the world and the most noble woman in the world. On that day, not only the little will bow to her, but he will also kneel down and bow to her when he sees her. Suddenly, Wang Piyun was full of expectations for the future. She wanted to see him look submissive in front of her. Seeing that his granddaughter agreed, Wang Xiang nodded with satisfaction. I said, "We, Sister Yun, have a general understanding of things. Sister Yun, be good to yourself, good days are ahead." Wang Piyun thanked her. She knew exactly what her grandfather meant by the good days. After dinner, the king told his family the good news, and the whole house was filled with joy. Mrs. Shangguan had something in her heart to say to the king, but looking at the joyous scene, she finally did not say what was in her heart. Mother Yang reminded Mrs. Shangguan, and Mrs. Shangguan said, "Today is a happy day. Let's talk about unhappy things at another time." Gu Huayu looked at the time and said, "It's already the 12th hour, I should go back." Lu Zikan reluctantly held her hand and asked, "When will Xiaoyu come over tomorrow?" Gu Huayu shook her head, "For the sake of Kingzu's marriage to my little cousin, I have to go to Zhuangzi and ask my second uncle and second aunt what they want. Grandma and the others are all in Zhuangzi. I will stay in Zhuangzi to accompany my grandmother tomorrow night and come back the day after tomorrow." Lu Zikan said, "Then when we return to the city the day after tomorrow, come directly here, okay?" Gu Huayu nodded, "Okay." Gu Huayu returned to Wutong Lane to explain the marriage between Wang Guzangluo Kingzu and Wan Xiaoshuang. The next day, Gu Huayu had breakfast and left for Minjiao Villa. When Mrs. Wan saw her coming back, she was so happy that she told Malu, "Let the kitchen cook the sweet and sour pork ribs, fry the eggplant boxes, and then have someone pick some tender pepper leaves and bring them back, wrap them in flour and egg liquid and fry them on a plate. Xiao likes to eat like this." Lu Ma happily responded, "Okay, I'll give you the instructions now." After Lu Ma left, Wan turned around and ordered Da Ya again, "Girl, go to the field and bring back a watermelon." Da Ya smiled and said, "Madam, you don't have to go to the fields. There are several watermelons frozen in the well. I'll go get them here, little one." Gu Huayu smiled and said, "Auntie, you don't have to work so hard, come and have a rest." Wan Shi smiled and sat down as instructed, and asked about Gu Chengliang and the others. Gu Huayu replied one by one, and mentioned the marriage between Kingzu and Wan Xiaoshuang. Zhang said, "This child Kingzu is honest and trustworthy, but his status is a bit, it's not that I don't look down on domestic servants. I heard that if he is a slave, the children he will give birth to in the future they are also slaves and their children cannot take the scientific examinations. I am just worried about Xiaoshuang's children." Gu Huayu smiled and said, "Second sister-in-law, don't worry, I have already liberated Kingzu. From now on, Kingzu will no longer be a slave." When Wang Gihua and Zhang heard that Kingzu had resigned, they felt relieved and happily thanked Gu Huayu. Wan Shi said with a smile, "Second sister-in-law used to worry about her daughter marrying into her husband's family and being angry with her mother-in-law and sister-in-law, she always had endless worries. Now it's better. De Shuang is by her side and Xiao Shuang is by her side." Zhang said with a smile, "This is all thanks to Xiaowu. If it weren't for Xiaowu, how could our family have the good life we have now?" Mrs. Ping smiled and said, "Mahua, we don't want to talk about this. It is fate that the family can meet together. We know our blessings and cherish them, and a happy family is better than anything else." Mahua is Jiang's name. Wan Shi nodded and said, "What the old lady said is that from now on, none of us are allowed to say things like TOEFL. A happy family is better than anything else." Zhang said with a smile, "Okay, listen to the old lady and don't say anything else." Gu Huayu liked this atmosphere very much. She sat on a low stool, leaning against Mrs. Ping, chatting with her family. After dinner, Gu Huayu went to Mrs. Ping's house and put a pile of posts on the table. "Grandma, these are all for you. Some of them have been posted several times." After Mrs. Wang took the post and read it, she reported to Mrs. Ping one by one who had sent the post. After hearing this, Mrs. Ping said, "Oh, this world is really very realistic. In these years when we have been living in poverty, we can count the number of people we go to on our fingers. The people who came to our door were none other than Yingzi, Mrs. Jin from the Qingqiu Duke's mansion, Xinlan, and the deceased Mrs. Tian from the Ningyuan Marquis mansion. They came to see us, and they didn't want to post anything. When they had time to spare, they thought of it, so they came to see us." Speaking of this, Mrs. Ping sighed heavily. Gu Huayu advised, "Grandma, don't be sad. If you don't want to go, we won't go. In the future, if they send another post, we will just decline." Mrs. Wang also comforted me. Mrs. Ping said, "I just sigh with emotion. If Yan Ran receives another post next time, she will decline it on the grounds that I am raising a general in Zhuangzi." Mrs. Wang took the words and said, "If you reject it a few times, no one will hand it over again." Gu Huayu nodded, "Okay." Mrs. Ping asked, "Yan Ran, how are you doing recently? Have you encountered any trouble since your identity was made public?" Gu Huayu shook her head, "No, everything is normal. Even if Huasu and Chen Song died, the clues from back then were also broken." Gu Huayu regretted that she had hastily killed Huasu and Chen Song. "At that time, I was young after all. When I learned what the two had done, I ended them both simply and brutally. If Huasu and Chen Song were still alive, would the investigation be much smoother? If she had it to do over again, would she do it again?" Thinking about old priests like Zhu Lao and others, she thought, she would still be able to do this. "Yan Ran, Yan Ran." Mrs. Wang shouted and pulled Gu Huayu's hand, and Gu Huayu came back to her senses. "And?" Mrs. Ping asked, "What is Yan Ran thinking about? She is lost in thought." Gu Huayu said, "I'm wondering if there is any oversight." Mrs. Ping comforted her, "Don't be impatient. It has been so many years since the incident, and it is already difficult to investigate. Let's investigate slowly, and one day the truth will be revealed." Gu Huayu nodded, "Grandma is right. It's getting late. Grandma should take a rest early and say goodbye Yan Ran." Gu Huayu was afraid of mentioning her mother's affairs, which made her grandmother feel uncomfortable and hurriedly ended the topic. Gu Huayu came out of Mrs. Ping's house and walked back to her own house along the corridor. At night in the suburbs, the moonlight is like water, the cicadas are chirping, and the evening wind blows slowly, bringing a cool feeling. Gu Huayu looked at the courtyard filled with moonlight, stopped going back to the house, and turned to the courtyard. Gu Huayu looked up at the sky, the bright moon was in the sky, and she suddenly missed Hua Jinlin and her parents. "I wonder if everything is okay for them at this moment?" Gu Huayu sat by the flower bed, holding her hands back, looking up at the sky, as if admiring the moon. Her thoughts had flown to a distant world, and she didn't even notice when Gu Jinnan came over. "Xiao, are you here?" Gu Huayu came back to her senses, sat up straight, and looked back at Gu Jinnan. My heart was horrified. When did Gu Jinnan come here? She didn't realize at all that this had happened more than once. "Second brother, haven't you rested yet?" Gu Jinnan sat down opposite Gu Huayu. "No, I don't feel sleepy. It's cool in the yard. So I came out to sit and didn't expect to meet Xiao." Gu Huayu said, "I just came from my grandmother's place. Seeing that the night was very nice, I came here to sit." "Second brother, do you want to drink?" Gu Jinnan nodded and said, "This is a good idea. It would be a bit disappointing if I didn't have a few drinks at such a nice night." Gu Huayu turned around and ordered, "King Yu, go to the kitchen to get some wine and vegetables." King Yu flashed out of the darkness and turned towards the kitchen. Gu Chennan saw Qing Yu and asked, "How is the investigation of your parents' case? Are there any clues?" Gu Huayu didn't want to talk more about this matter and simply said, "Not yet." Gu Chennan comforted, "It has been more than 10 years. It will definitely not be easy to investigate. Don't be impatient and take your time." Gu Huayu nodded, "Thank you, second brother, I know." While the brother and sister were talking, Qing Yu came over with wine and food, accompanied by Chen Shui. Chen Shui put the dishes on the stone table and greeted Gu Hua, "Hello, princess." King Yu explained, "I went to the kitchen and happened to meet Miss Chen. Miss Chen heard that the young man was delivering food and wine to the princess, so she took the initiative to come over and help." Gu Huayu greeted, "Second brother said that if you don't drink 2 drinks at this night, you will be living up to the beautiful scenery. Sister Shui is here, let's drink 2 drinks together." Chen Shui heard that Gu Huayu hadn't stopped and wanted to come over and say hello to her. Seeing Gu Huayu's warm greetings, I felt a little reluctant to refuse the hospitality, but I also took into account the etiquette between master and servant. Gu Huayu noticed Chen Shui's hesitation and left King Yu with him instead. "King Yu, you go over again and bring me 2 more sets of bowls and chopsticks, and you can stay and have 2 drinks. Gu Huayu often drinks and dines with everyone." King Yu has long been used to it and responded cheerfully, "Thank you, princess. I'll go right now." Chen Shui was relieved to see that Qing Yu deserved it, and the concern in her heart faded a lot. Said, "Thank you, princess, then I would rather obey your orders than be respectful." Gu Chennan saw Chen Shui's restraint and said with a smile, "We are all our own people, Miss Chen doesn't have to be formal." Chen Shui sat down on Gu Huayu's right-hand side and said, "Thank you, second master." Gu Chennan put the bowl and chopsticks in front of him in front of Chen Shui, and said with a smile, "Miss Chen said thank you and left. Miss Chen taught martial arts to the first graders, so I should thank Miss Chen." Gu Huayu looked at Chen Shui. "On the first day of junior high school, are you practicing martial arts with Sister Shui?" Chen Shui said, "That day I was practicing in the courtyard, and Chu Yi happened to see me, so he pestered me to teach him." "Princess, 1 jar of wine is a little short." The younger one brought another jar. "Let's have a great time drinking today." Qing Yu came over with the jar of wine in his arms. Gu Huayu turned around and saw King Yu holding a big altar, and asked, "How are you 2 drinking?" Gu Chennan looked at the wine jar in King Yu's hand and said, "My ability to drink is average." Before Gu Chennan could finish speaking, Qing Yu grabbed the words and said, "Second master, you can't be cowardly." Chen Shui took the bowl and chopsticks from Qing Yu's hand and said, "It's okay, I'll drink with you." Gu Huayu smiled and said, "I can't tell, but you are still a drinker." Chen Shui poured the wine and said, "When I was young, my father, master and the others would always give me a few sips when they drank. Gradually, I started to drink more." After Chen Shui finished speaking, she suddenly realized something and looked at Gu Huayu awkwardly. Gu Chennan didn't know about Chen Song, and he didn't notice Chen Shui's expression in the night, so he answered, "You are a girl, and your father and they also let you drink." Chen Shui looked at Gu Huayu uncomfortably. Gu Huayu said, "Sister Shui is a child of Jianghu, and her family does not follow these small details." Gu Chennan understood, "That's it? This informality makes so many people envious. That's it, come on, let's go one by one." Qing Yu raised his wine bowl towards everyone. The 3 of them raised their bowls and touched them with him. Gu Chennan took a sip of wine and said, "Come, let's eat some food." The 3 of them picked up their chopsticks and started eating the food. After a few rounds, Gu Chennan talked a lot more, talking about things when he was a child. "Humans, when I was young, I wanted to grow up, but when I grew up, I always thought that when I was young, my brothers would go hunting in the mountains and catch fish in the river during their spare time, and exchange what they hunted for money to buy some daily necessities for the family. At that time, my family was very poor, and I was able to contribute to the family. I was a very important person in the family. Those days were very difficult, but I was very happy. Guchannan talked about whatever came to his mind and was filled with emotion. Gu Huayu picked up the bowl and said to Guchannan, "Second brother, I respect you. In those days, you paid for my medicine and bought me sugar candies." Guchannan smiled and picked up the bowl, touched it with Gu Huayu, lowered his head and took a sip, and said, "At that time, you were thin and small, but you were very sensible. That medicine is obviously very bitter, but when you drink it, your brows will become knotted, which makes your heart ache. You were afraid that we would be heartbroken, so you comforted us every time and said it was okay. You are just too sensible." Guchannan's eyes were sore as he spoke. In order to cover up his emotions, he picked up the wine bowl and took a sip of wine. Chen Shui asked, "The princess was in poor health when she was a child?" Gu Huayu nodded. "My mother-in-law said that she was exposed to smoke that year, and on the way back to Shishan, she caught wind and cold due to the freezing weather. She was not treated in time, and the root cause of the disease was left. She needs to take medicine for a long time." Chen Shui felt guilty after hearing this. Gu Huayu reached out and shook her hand, shook her head at her, and whispered, "It's all over. Come, drink." End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Rebirth of Space, the lucky girl from a farm family. Author, he would fire every. Chapter 253. Chapter 253 Suspicion. Chen Shui picked up the wine bowl and touched it with Gu Huayu, then raised her head and drank all the wine in the bowl. Guchannan said, "Fortunately, Xiao specializes in studying medical books and has adjusted his body well. Xiao, my second brother respects you." Gu Huayu picked up the bowl and touched it. "Thank you, second brother." Guchannan said, "Thank you for nothing. I just hope you can find out the truth as soon as possible and avenge your father and mother." Gu Huayu took a sip of wine, put down the wine bowl, picked up a piece of beef with chopsticks, put it into her mouth, chewed it twice before saying, "I hope, more than 10 years have passed, and the clues have been cut off. This is not easy, and we can't rush it." Chen Shui looked at Gu Huayu and asked, "Princess, what happened back then, and what happened behind the scenes?" Gu Huayu looked up at her, nodded and said, "Yes, what we see is just the surface. The long shadow guard is used by the royal family, and it is related to the royal family. There is no way to avoid the struggle between imperial power and the party. There are too many people involved behind this, and it is intricately linked. It's been so many years, so it's not easy to find out." Guchannan thought for a while and said, "If this is the case, Xiao, you should pay attention to your safety." Gu Huayu said, "Second brother, don't worry. Only by protecting yourself can you avenge your parents. I won't let anything happen to me." Chen Shui looked at Gu Huayu, then at Qingyu and Guchannan beside her, and swallowed the words on her lips. The four of them drank up the 2 jars of wine, and Gu Huayu and Chen Shui drank even more. Qingyu asked Guchannan not to be scared, but he got drunk first, and Guchannan sent him back to the house. The next day, Gu Huayu woke up at the end of the morning. She originally planned to go back to have lunch with Lu Zikan, but it seemed that she couldn't make it. Drinking in the secret passage really messed things up. Gu Huayu had lunch at Zhuangzi and played with Chuyi for a while before heading back to the city. As the carriage arrived at the city gate, Qingyu saw many soldiers at the gate and said, "Princess, the city gate has been fortified. There are many more soldiers. Something may have happened in the city." Gu Huayu raised the curtains and looked at the city gate. After a moment, she said, "It seems that you are not allowed to go in but not allowed to go out." King Yu nodded and said, "Yes, I only saw people coming in, but no one leaving." Gu Huayu put down the curtain and said, "Let's go into the city and find out something." The city was suddenly closed. Could it be that Han Shi and others took action and succeeded? If so, Han Shi is simply a man of action, doing things vigorously and resolutely. King Yu raised his riding whip and responded, "Yes." As the car entered the city, Qing Yu slowed down the car and asked the people around him, "Old man, why are there so many officials at the door?" The old man turned to look at Qing Yu and said, "You didn't know that such a big thing happened last night? Are you the first time you arrived in the capital?" King Yu nodded repeatedly and flattered him casually, "The old man has really sharp eyes. The younger one has just entered the city and is here to visit relatives." Being praised, the smile on the old man's face visibly rose, and his voice softened a lot. "Last night, I don't know who killed 5 people and placed them at the entrance of the Prime Minister's mansion in Baekangman. This morning, the Prime Minister's servants saw it and reported it to the officials, who ordered the city to be sealed." "Young man, there have been frequent incidents in Beijing recently, and it is indeed a troubled time. Just the day before yesterday, the 6th Master of the British government was assassinated. Before the murderer could be caught, something happened again in the Prime Minister's house. Young man, stay home well and try to go out as little as possible." King Yu bowed and "Thank you, old man, for reminding me." King Yu drove forward for a while, and Gu Hua said, "Go directly to the west of the city. I'll change Master Liu's dressing first." King Yu couldn't restrain her inner excitement. "Princess." Gu Huayu stopped him and said, "Drive the car well. If you have anything to say, let's talk about it when we get home." King Yu nodded and said, "I'm confused." King Yu drove to the west of the city. When the car arrived at Qingzhou, Ruhi came to greet him and shouted excitedly, "Master." Gu Huayu asked, "How long have you been waiting?" Ruhi said, "Little Chenchi has been waiting here." "Master, something happened in the Prime Minister Wang's mansion." Gu Huayu nodded and said lightly, "Well, I heard someone say it when I entered the city." King Yu took over the words, "The city gate is sealed now, no one is allowed in or out." King Yu and Ruhi were chatting, and Gu Huayu went into the house to tidy up after herself. Soon, Gu Huayu, dressed in men's clothing, entered the British palace with Qing Yu. Entering Shuiying Garden, Gu Huayu heard the British Duke's voice and said to Ruhi, "The British Duke is here, let's not go in yet." Ruhi looked around and asked, "The Duke is here? How did the master know?" After saying that, Ruhi walked to the concierge and asked, "Daong, is the Duke of the country here?" Daong nodded and said, "Yes, it's been a quarter of an hour." Ruhi turned his head and gave a thumbs up to Gu Huayu, "Master's hearing is amazing." Gu Huayu smiled but said nothing. Ruhi took Gu Huayu around to the backyard of Shuiying Yuan. After the British father left, the two of them entered the main house. When Lu Zikan saw Gu Huayu coming in, he raised the corners of his mouth and asked, "Have lunch at Zhuangzi and set out?" Gu Huayu nodded and said sheepishly, "Yes, I got up late this morning." Lu Zikan just thought that she was tired from running back and forth these days. "You have been working hard these days, so you should take a good rest." Gu Huayu walked to the bed and sat down. "Did the British father come to question you?" Lu Zikan shook his head and said, "Have you questioned me? He came here to find out what happened." Gu Huayu thought it was too funny, and said angrily, trying to talk, "What does he want? You were almost killed, and instead of helping you, he came to check on you. Is he your biological grandfather?" Lu Zikan felt warm when he saw Gu Huayuan speaking angrily for him. He stretched out his hand to hold her hand. "Don't be angry. It's not worth it to be so angry. He only has interests in his eyes. I've long been used to it." Luzikin's words made Gu Huayu even more heartbroken. She tightened Luzikin's hand and said, "In the past, I couldn't control how they bullied you. In the future, they will never bully you again." Luzikin's heart suddenly softened into a puddle of water, and he said, "Okay, I will just follow the gossip from now on. Okay, don't be angry anymore." As he spoke, Luzikin took out his hand and pinched Gu Huayu's nose. Then he said, "In the past few days, I have been lying on the bed, surrounded by people like Xian, Yan, and Ji. I have never left the British government residence, so it is useless for him to be suspicious." Gu Huayu asked, "Where's Yuan? Why haven't you seen Yuan these days?" Luzikin replied, "Yuan was sent out to do some work by me and is not in the capital." Gu Huayu said oh and didn't ask any more questions. Luzikin said, "The incident in Wang Xiang's mansion alarmed the court. The emperor was furious in the morning. He reprimanded Lu Fuyan in front of the civil and military officials of the court, and assigned Dali Temple to investigate the case strictly." Gu Huayu smiled and said, "Ruan San was a retainer of the Prime Minister Wang's mansion, but he died at the door of the Prime Minister Wang's mansion. It is time for a thorough investigation. I want to see if the Prime Minister Wang can withstand the investigation." Luzikin smiled and said, "What are you thinking about, you little idiot?" Gu Huayu said, "I'm thinking about how to help Dali Temple. Li Tao's father is the young minister of Dali Temple. Should I ask Li Tao for tea?" Luzikin blurted out, "Xiao Yu, you are not allowed to see Li Tao alone." Gu Huayu raised her eyebrows and asked, "Are you jealous?" Luzikin didn't mind the embarrassment and said truthfully, "Well, I'm jealous." Gu Huayu didn't expect that he deserved to be so smooth. She couldn't say more and just said, "Okay, I'll take King Yu and the others with me when I see him." "Take me with you when you see him." Gu Huayu smiled and said, "Why don't I reassure you?" Luzikin shook his head and said solemnly, "I am very relieved about you, but I am not worried about Li Tao. I have to go and take a look." Gu Huayu had no choice but to say, "Okay, I'll take you with me when I see him." When Luzikin saw Gu Huayu agreeing, he said dotingly, "How good," then he brought the topic back, "What happened last night may frighten them. Xiao, next time, you have to be more cautious, I'm worried that they may have something to do with it action." Gu Huayu said, "You can rest in peace and recuperate, don't worry about this. Even if they are suspicious of me, I am not afraid of them. Don't talk, I will take your pulse." Luzikin shut his mouth in cooperation. Gu Huayu checked the pulse and then checked the wound, which was already scabbed. He said, "It takes other people half a month to get better, but you will be better in 3 days." Luzikin looked down at the wound and asked, "Can I get out of bed and move around freely?" Gu Huayu nodded, "Okay, you'd better not go out. Dr. Who has seen your wounds?" As he spoke, Luzikin stood up and said, "Nothing, I'm just walking around in Shuiying Garden." At the Prime Minister's mansion, Mrs. Shangguan got up at midnight and learned that Miao Ershui, Wang Xian, Lu Si, Huang Xing, and Ruan were killed and their bodies were thrown to the door of the Prime Minister's mansion. She fainted. The whole house was suddenly so busy that everyone was on their feet. The Prime Minister went to court to receive the letter from his family and rushed back home. As soon as he entered the door, he asked, "Has the doctor come over? How is the old lady? Have you woken up?" The servant bent his knees and said, "Back to Prime Minister, the doctor has come over to treat the old lady. The old lady has woken up, but she has not spoken." The Prime Minister went to Anfu Hall, with his 3 sons and 3 daughters-in-law waiting beside him. When everyone saw the king come in, they all gave him greetings. Wang Xiang asked, "You haven't spoken yet?" The eldest son Wang Haoch leaned forward and said, "Go back to father, mother has not spoken yet." The king saw that the room was full of people and said, "Since everyone is awake, it's all right. Let's all go back." After everyone left, Wang Xiang walked to the bed, stretched out his hand to hold Mrs. Shangwen's hand, and said, "You and I have been through hardships for decades, what have you not experienced? What happened today? You were frightened by such a trivial matter." Old Madame Shangguan turned her head to look at Wang Xiang, then looked at Grandma Yang. Mother Yang understood and came over and took the servant out. Mrs. Shangguan waited for the servants to step back, took her hand out of Wang Xiang's hand, and tried to sit up. Wang Xiang hurriedly stretched out his hand to support me, put a pillow behind Mrs. Shangguan, and asked, "Do you have something to say to me?" Mrs. Shangguan nodded and said, "Master Xiang, Lulu is not simple." After not speaking for a long time, Madame Shangguan's throat became dry and hoarse when she spoke. Wang Xiang stood up and poured a glass of water over. He handed the teacup to Mrs. Shangguan and said, "Drink some water." Mrs. Shangguan took 2 sips from the hand of the Prime Minister, and her throat felt much better. Wang Xiang casually put the cup on the bedside table and asked, "What's wrong with Lulu?" Mrs. Shangguan told the king in detail what happened before. After Wang Xiang heard this, he was silent for a moment and said, "So, Lulu knows that this assassination was ordered by you." Mrs. Shangguan leaned on the head of the bed, her eyes fell on the pattern of the curtain, and she said quietly, "When he threw the body at the door, didn't he tell me that he knew everything I did? I don't understand, how did he know? It has only been 3 days since the incident happened. Neither the Jingzhou mansion nor the military and horse division found out, so how could he know?" Old Madame Shangguan asked herself over and over again, this was something she couldn't figure out. Wang Xiang thought for a while and said, "I don't think it was necessarily Lulu who did this." Mrs. Shangguan turned to look at Wang Xiang and asked, "Isn't it Lulu?" The Prime Minister nodded. That day, even if Lulu was not hit critically, the poison on the arrow was still very poisonous. Lulu was poisoned and his life or death was uncertain. His people should rush to try to save him instead of tracking down the murderer. After Wang Xiang mentioned it, Mrs. Shangguan frowned even more tightly, and then murmured, "If it's not Lulu, who could it be?" The couple fell into deep thought, looked at each other at the same time, and said in unison, "Is it the Emperor?" Mrs. Shangguan said, "It should be him, and it can only be him. Otherwise, who else has this ability?" The king thought for a while and said, "If it is really the Emperor, then why is he so angry in the court today?" The Emperor also ordered Dali Temple to conduct a thorough investigation. Judging from the Emperor's angry expression, it didn't look like he was pretending. Mrs. Shangguan said, "If it's not the Emperor, who can it be? Who has such ability? This man is so powerful that it makes people feel scared." The Prime Minister rubbed his beard with his hand and nodded slightly, "I will investigate this matter. Don't think too much about it, and don't make any random moves again." Mrs. Shangguan leaned back and said, "Seeing the third girl being bullied by a country girl, how can I not think more?" After Shangguan's old lady said this, she sat up straight again, looked at the king and asked, "Mr. Xiang, could it be that wild girl?" The Prime Minister paused his hand and said, "It's very possible. It's not easy for her to return to Beijing." Mrs. Shangguan recounted what happened at the flower party at Huaqing Palace yesterday. Finally, he said, "I asked the third girl. When the wild girl took action, she was 3 to 4 feet away from her and Sister Yi, and the rice cake flew steadily to her and Sister Yi's heads as if it had eyes. Everyone present was so shocked that their eyes widened." Wang Xiang frowned slightly and said, "It is really not easy for a girl to have such skills. She must have learned and practiced hard since she was a child. Looking back, I asked someone to check this girl out. You have to tell the 3 girls not to provoke this wild girl before marrying into the Xian prince's house, so as not to cause trouble." Mrs. Shangguan nodded, "I understand. I will take good care of the third girl and won't let her get into trouble again." The king nodded and said, "This is best. The matter has come to an end and there is no point in thinking too much. You can have a good life and I will take care of the rest. Mrs. Shangguan nodded in agreement. Okay, I understand. The British Duke came out of Shuiying Yuan and ordered Du Bin, prepare the car, I want to go out. Du Bin turned around and was about to give instructions when a servant came over and said, My lord, the wise king has come over. Ying hurriedly went out to welcome him, and met the Xian Wang who had just gotten off the car at the screen wall. End of this chapter. The Rebirth of Space, the lucky girl from a farm family. Author, he would fire every. Chapter 254. Chapter 254, There's no going back. After the ceremony, the grandfather and grandson went to Wen Yuan Pavilion. Entering the study, Du Bin served tea and exited the study with Chen Yun. The British Duke asked, Why did the prince come here? Is it because of the affairs of the Prime Minister's palace? The Xian Wang nodded. Among the 5 people who died at the entrance of the Prime Minister Wang's mansion, 2 were from Yuan Da restaurant. However, the place where Zikin's accident occurred was right at the entrance of Yuan Da restaurant. This makes people think a lot. Has the Duke asked Zikin? Did he do this? The British Duke said, Probably not. Zikin was seriously injured and could not get up from the bed. As for the people serving him, on the day of the incident, Ru Jin followed the people from Jingzhou mansion to track down the murderer, and made 2 trips in and out. Ruhi went to the drug store twice to grab some medicine, but Rugjuan was always at the house. Yuan went to Hongcheng to handle affairs for Zikin and had been gone for more than half a month. The wise king walked around the room and asked, If it's not Zikin, who could it be? Yesterday, my father asked the Prime Minister to come down to talk, but today such a big thing happened in the Prime Minister's mansion. In order to get my father to agree to this marriage, I have tried my best. I thought it was foolproof, but something went wrong at this juncture. Looking at the angry king, Ying shook his head and said, I haven't figured it out either. However, if the assassination of Zikin was done by people from the Prime Minister's office, then they went too far. The King Xian argued, Zi Qin's withdrawal from the engagement has made the people in the Prime Minister's office angry. I am not surprised that they will attack Zigzun. It's just not early or late, but at this time, it's not very annoying. These corpses were placed at the door of the Prime Minister's mansion. Who with a discerning eye could not see the connection between this matter and Zikin's assassination? What would your father think? Given his father's preference for Zi Qin, his father would definitely go to the Prime Minister's mansion with suspicion. The matter of granting marriage may not be settled. The wise king sat down on the chair, his face full of frustration. The British Duke heard what the wise king said and asked, What are your plans next? The wise king shook his head, I have no plans at the moment. Let's wait and see what my father does. Is Zikin okay? I will go to Shuiying Garden to have a look. With that said, the wise king stood up, and the British Duke stood up after him. Go, Zikin has always been kind to the prince. Zikin will be very happy if the prince can go and see him. Lu Zikin and Gu Huayu were walking in the courtyard when a servant hurriedly came over and said, Sir, the prince is coming to our side. Gu Huayu smiled and said, You have to go back and continue to pretend to be sick. It's time for me to go back too. I'll see you another day. Lu Zikin wanted to persuade him to stay, but he was worried that the wise king would stay for a long time. He can drive away Lu Zigzun, but he cannot drive away the wise king. So he nodded and said, Let Ruhi take you back. Gu Huayu nodded, I know. Go back and lie down quickly. Remember to put some powder on your face so as not to expose any flaws. Lu Zikin walked up to the room and turned back and said, Remember to come see me, otherwise, I will be lovesick. Gu Huayu raised her eyebrows, smiled and waved to him, I know. Gu Huayu retreated to the corner of the corridor and watched Lu Zikin enter the main room. She turned around and saw the Xianwang entering the courtyard with his entourage. When King Xian entered the main room, the sound of pleasantries rang out in the room. "Ruhi, go and do your business, there is Rugjuan here." After a while, Ruhi walked over to Gu Huayu and said, "Master, I asked the younger one to take you back. Let's go this way and go out through the back door." "Okay." Gu Huayu followed Ruhi to the back door. "Madam, the prince went to Wenyuan Pavilion first, and after coming out of Wenyuan Pavilion, he went to Shuiying Garden." A voice came from the left. Hearing the words Shuiying Yuan, Gu Huayu stopped. Seeing Gu Huayu stop, Ruhi stopped, turned around and asked, "Master, what's wrong?" Gu Huayu pointed to the walled yard on the left and asked, "Whose yard belongs to it?" Ruhi turned to look over and said, "On the other side of the wall is the backyard. The place the master pointed to is the second wife's Dangui garden. Next to the Dangui garden is the second wife's Yojing garden." "Mother, I don't blame my grandmother for being angry. The duke and the prince are indeed partial. Grandma is the prince's biological grandmother. How many times has the prince come to visit her during these days of illness?" "Just once, that time, it was because Mr. Lu returned to the house that day. The prince went to Rong'an Hall for a walk, and then went to Shuiying Garden. He stayed there for more than an hour, and even asked Mr. Lu to go to Fanlu for dinner. Today, it is even more extreme. He went directly to Shuiying Yuan from Wenyuan Pavilion. I am afraid that the prince will not remember that he has a grandmother in Rong'an Hall. Actually, there's nothing to be angry about. It's just that the old lady can't figure it out and can't see through it. Alas, old lady, she has lived in vain for decades." "How do you say this, mother?" The old lady was unhappy. She was unwilling to accept it. She felt that the duke and the prince were partial to the sixth child. How can the prince and the empress be so partial to each other? I have been married to a British prince for more than 20 years, watched my queen enter the palace, and watched the prince grow up. The prince and his wife are worthy of being mother and son. They only have eyes for themselves and their own interests. In this regard, the prince and the empress are very much like the prince. You see that they are partial to Lao Lu, but in fact, what they prefer is the emperor's attitude towards Lao Lu. One day, the emperor's attitude towards Lao Lu changed. If you look at the duke and the prince again, I guarantee that they will not even look at Lao Lu. Why does the emperor prefer Mr. Lu? I don't know. It's said to be because of the queen, who is Lao Liu's aunt. "Master, someone is coming this way, let's leave quickly," Ruhi reminded. Gu Huayu nodded and followed Ruhi away. She didn't expect that Li was one of the few sober people in the duke's mansion. In Shuiying Garden, the pale-faced Lu Zikan was lying on the bed, looking listless. Compared with when he was walking in the yard before, he looked completely different. The Xianwang sat down at the table and asked with some concern, "How do you feel? Are you feeling better? Has Doctor Hu come to see you today?" Lu Zikan said feebly, "It is the Emperor's supreme grace to bother Dr. Hu wants to visit the palace. How can I trouble Dr. Hu every day? Besides, I have Ruhi by my side, so there is no need to trouble Dr. Hu with everything." The wise king nodded, "That's right. You still have Ruhi by your side. I almost forgot about it." After saying this, the wise king asked, "Did you see anyone shooting arrows at you that day?" Lu Zikan shook his head. At that time, the car was surrounded by people, and Ruhin started fighting with others again. My attention was all on Ruhin and nothing else. The wise king said thoughtfully, "Who would attack you? You are not the one who caused trouble." Lu Zikan advised, "My lord, don't think too much about it. Your Majesty has already asked people from Jingzhou Mansion and the Military and Horse Division to investigate this matter. We just have to wait patiently. Jingzhou Mansion must give an explanation." Sun said that Prince Yen's palace and Prime Minister Wang's palace are planning to get married. Is it true? Congratulations, Your Majesty. Father has not yet issued an edict on this matter, so it is too early to say congratulations now. The king wants Xiren to serve as consul in the palace. What do you think, Zikin? The Xianwang replied awkwardly and quickly changed the subject. Lu Zikin said, as long as the prince thinks it is good, Xiren is doing his job with all his heart. The wise king nodded and said with some agreement, I think so too. It seems that we have similar views on people. I also think that he is more dedicated to his work and not impatient. The prince has given me so much respect, how can I dare to compare with the prince with my eyesight like this? After Lu Zikin finished speaking, he yawned twice, narrowed his eyes slightly, and said tiredly and energetically, I'm sorry, I'm rude. Seeing that Lu Zikin was tired, the wise king stood up knowingly and said, Zikin, please rest more and hope for a speedy recovery. I will take my leave now and come to see you another day. Lu Zikin tried his best to open his eyes and said apologetically, I'm sorry, the medicine contains sedative ingredients. After drinking it, I feel sleepy. It's okay. You have a good rest. I will take my leave. Zikin told Rugjuan, send the prince off for me. Rugjuan bowed down and said to the wise king respectfully, Your Majesty, please come this way. Lu Zikin looked at the departing figure of the wise king and fell into deep thought. He was afraid that there would never be any return between them. The king Xian left Shuiying Yuan and took Chen Jiayun and others to return home. Chen Jiayun reminded, Sir, we haven't gone to Rong'an Hall to pay our respects to the old lady yet. The wise king thought for a while and walked to Rong'an Hall. When the wise king arrived at the entrance of Rong'an Hall, Fu Rong hurriedly entered the room and reported to Mrs. Yang, Old Madam, the prince is here. Mrs. Yang said impatiently, Come here, why are you in a hurry? I know, go down and do your work. Fu Rong stepped back. Seeing Mrs. Yang's indifferent look, Grandma Wang carefully advised her, Old Madam, it's rare for the prince to come here. Mrs. Yang raised her head and looked at Grandma Wang and said, He is pretending to come to see me. I still have to laugh with him and sing with him, right? Wang Yan also wanted to continue to persuade, and looked up to see that the king had stepped into the door, and hurried to the king of the king. Seeing the wise king come in, Mrs. Yang closed her eyes and pretended to sleep. Seeing Mrs. Yang's eyes closed, the wise king asked in a low voice, Grandma, have you rested? Grandma Wang bent her knees and responded, Back to your lord, the old lady always sleeps for an hour every afternoon. The wise king nodded and said, It is a good thing to be able to eat and sleep. When Grandma wakes up, tell her that I have visited her. I have something to do, so I will see Grandma next time. Grandma Wang bent her knees and bowed in response. After the wise king left, Mrs. Yang opened her eyes, turned over and sat up. Grandma Wang turned around and saw Mrs. Yang sitting on the soft couch. She sighed slightly and said, Why are you doing this? Mrs. Yang curled her lips and said, If it weren't for Xiren, I wouldn't even bother to pretend. While pouring tea for Mrs. Yang, Grandma Wang nodded and said with a smile, Yes, you always do this all for the sake of the uncle. Mrs. Yang took the tea handed over by Grandma Wang, lowered her head and took a sip. Did the prince come from that evil barrier? Grandma Wang replied, Yes, the prince is coming from Shuiying Yuan. Mrs. Yang put her cup on the table next to her and said with a sense of loneliness, Your Majesty, after living in the palace for a long time, she has changed. She is not grateful at all for the fact that I am doing her best. She would rather trust outsiders than Lao Shen, who is her biological mother. She is the flesh that fell from the old body. Will the old body still harm her? Lu Dinkin didn't crawl out of my belly, how could the people in his room marry us? That evil man has a very deep scheming mind. How many times have I reminded you of this? The queen just can't listen. I can't understand the prince's proposal for marriage. There are many ladies in the capital who are dignified, graceful, gentle, and pleasant. As a prince, Why worry about not being able to find a good match? The mother-in-law had to pick up the evil obstacle to Wang Ye. Your Majesty, aren't you being a mean prince? Grandma Wang advised, the empress should have her own considerations. Maybe the Wang Xiongfu will be more helpful to the prince. Bah, Grandma Yang blurted out, that's just stupid talk. You have to rely on your own strength to make iron, don't you understand? With a status like the prince, if he relies on others today, others will hinder him in the future. Instead of using these crooked ideas, it is better for the prince to behave well in front of the emperor. Wang Yan owed his body, the old lady said reasonable, and the next time Wang came over, you always said to Wang Ye will listen to your old words. Mrs. Yang waved her hand, that's all. They all dislike Lao Shen very much. How can they listen to Lao Shen's words? Lao Shen also wants to understand that apart from Xiren, Lao Shen doesn't care about anyone else. Grandma Wang advised, old madam, please don't speak angrily. Your Majesty is the old madam's darling, and the prince was also pampered by the old madam and grew up. How can the old madam say that she doesn't care? The uncle said that the prince asked him to go to the prince's palace to serve as consul. From now on, if the old lady has anything to say, she can ask the uncle to tell the prince. Mrs. Yang was a little moved when she heard this and asked, will the prince listen to Xiren? Grandma Wang shook her head, I don't know, this old man is working in the palace. Even if he doesn't listen to everything he says, he will think about it. Mrs. Yang thought for a while and said, Your Majesty is kind-hearted. As long as the evildoer doesn't go to the palace, he will listen to Xiren sooner or later. Speaking of this, Mrs. Yang asked, do you buy the food for Xu Ying and yourself, or do you go to the big kitchen to get it? Grandma Wang looked at Mrs. Yang nervously and said, I came to the big kitchen to get the ingredients and went back to the small kitchen in Xu Ying to cook them myself. The old lady asked what we were doing. Mrs. Yang glanced at Grandma Wang, and after a moment, she said, give that evil obstacle some more of the medicine from back then. Grandma Wang's hand froze and she said, old madam, are you afraid that the medicine won't work? Old Mrs. Yang asked, why? Grandma Wang said, the person next to Mr. Liu, Ruhi, has great medical skills. If he sees the clues. Mrs. Yang said disdainfully, so what if he finds out? If I insist on not admitting my guilt, what can he do to me? Grandma Wang advised, what can Mr. Liu do to the old lady? But what about the emperor? Mr. Liu is deeply loved by the emperor. What if Mr. Liu makes trouble in front of the emperor? Old Madame Yang looked at Grandma Wang coldly with a sullen face. She regretted that she had not torn down the evil barrier a few years ago. Grandma Wang was so stared at by Grandma Yang that she stood aside cautiously, waiting for Mrs. Yang's stormy scolding. For the first time, Mrs. Yang did not scold loudly, but said lightly, I'm tired, just stay here for a while. Grandma Wang hurriedly stepped forward to help Mrs. Yang lie down, and then put a thin quilt on her. Just as Grandma Wang was about to retreat, Mrs. Yang said calmly, you need to remember, you are my servant. End of this chapter. The Rebirth of Space, the Lucky Girl from a Farm Family. Author, He Would Fire Every. Chapter 255. Chapter 255 Difficult. Grandma Wang hurriedly knelt down and said, Old lady, please calm down. This slave has always remembered the old lady's teachings and did not dare to relax at all. Lao Nu is the old lady's servant. Not only the old slave, but also the old slave and his whole family are the old lady's servants. The old slave will not do anything to disgrace the old lady. Mrs. Yang closed her eyes and said slowly, get up, remember your words. Let me keep an eye on Wen Yuan Pavilion and Shuiying Garden. Grandma Wang bowed down and responded. Yes, I understand. Gu Huayu came out of the British government residence and asked King Yu to drive to the house near Quiping Road for half a day. Junshi Dexin came out and said, "Princess." Gu Huayu nodded and asked, "Are you here?" "Han Shi didn't come here today." Junshi leaned forward and said, "Brother Han went to the east of the city. There was a letter from over there saying that someone from Gyeong Pavilion came to the door. Brother Han said he went over to have a look." Upon hearing this, Gu Huayu got into the car again and told Qingyu, "Go to the east of the city." "Okay. Sit down." Princess Qingyu jumped on the carriage, raised the whip in his hand, and drove the carriage to the east of the city. Qingyu's driving skills were excellent, and he chose streets with few people to walk on. He rushed from the west to the east of the city in more than half an hour. The car drove near Dongshui Gate, and the air was filled with a disgusting smell of feces. Qingyu retched twice, "What does it smell like? It really stinks." Gu Huayu took out a handkerchief and covered her nose, sighing secretly that she was reckless. At that time, she only focused on venting her anger and ignored the feelings of the people around her. She said sorry to the people in her heart. Qingyu said, "Princess, this place is too smelly. How about I send you to Chang'an restaurant and let Han Shi and others come to see you? Is that okay?" Gu Huayu shook her head, "No, let's go." Qingyu drove the car to the backyard where he had been relaxing for a long time. "Why is Qingyu here?" Jungzin asked. Qingyu stopped the car and said, "Miss, Jungzin is in front." When Qingyu spoke, Gu Huayu had already lifted the curtain and jumped out of the car. When Jungzin saw Gu Huayu, he hurriedly came over and bowed to greet her. When he was about to call the princess, Qingyu reminded, "There are many people, so call me Miss." Gu Huayu asked, "What's going on? Where is Han Shi?" Jungzin leaned forward and said, "Miss, Brother Han has gone to the yamen. At noon today, shopkeeper Huang from Gyeong brought people to our shop to throw excrement, and the people in our shop started fighting with them. Later, someone reported it to the government. Someone came and took everyone to the yamen." Gu Huayu asked, "Did you come here with Han Shi?" Jungzin nodded and said, "Yes, I came here with Brother Han. Brother Han asked me to wait here. If the young lady comes over, let the young lady wait for him at Chang'an restaurant." Gu Huayu then asked, "Are any of our people injured?" Jungzin nodded, "I heard from the neighbors that there were injuries on both sides." Qingyu asked, "Is the yamen far from here? Let's go and have a look." Qingyu looked at Gu Huayu when he said the last sentence. Gu Huayu nodded and said, "Let's go forward. We will reach the yamen after turning 2 corners." With that said, Gu Huayu got into the car, while Qingyu and Jungzin sat at the front of the car. When the 3 of them arrived at the yamen, they saw that the 3 floors and 3 rooms outside the door were crowded with people. Qingyu parked the car on the side of the road, and with Jungzin protecting Gu Huayu, they squeezed in until they reached the entrance of the yamen hall. The lobby was full of people kneeling on their knees, and it was completely dark. Qingyu whispered to Gu Hua, "Miss, the person kneeling in the middle of the first row is Brother Han." Gu Huayu also saw it and nodded, "I see it." "Mrs. Here Sui'er's voice sounded from behind. Gu Huayu turned to look over, nodded towards Sui'er, and asked, "What's going on now?" Sui'er said in a low voice, "Gyeong Pavilion may have said hello, a few adults are leaning towards that side, the situation is very unfavorable for us. Gyeong Pavilion insists that we poured excrement into their store last night, so they came to the door today." Gu Huayu looked at the presiding judge sitting in the high hall and asked, "Who is this person? Where did he come from?" Sui'er followed Gu Huayu's gaze and said, "Sitting in the middle is Kui Mingqing, the young master of Jingzhou Mansion. This man is the cousin of Kui Mingyuan, the Minister of Civil Affairs. I used to work as a fellow magistrate in Jingzhou and was transferred to the capital last year. To the right of Kui Mingqing is Zhangji, a judicial officer of Jingzhou Prefecture, who was a jinchi in the 8th year of Changping. To the left of Kui Ming is Mu Zexin, the chief secretary. This person was the same year as Zhangji. Just when Gu Huayu was about to ask a question, there was a sudden pop sound in front of her, which startled her. Gu Huayu turned around and looked over, and saw Kui Mingqing sitting in front of him holding the gavel in his hand, staring at the person kneeling on the ground with piercing eyes. As soon as the alarm bell sounded, everyone looked at Kui Mingqing. Gu Huayu swallowed back the words that came to her lips, folded her hands on her chest, and waited for Kui Mingqing's next words. Kui Mingqing looked at Han Shi, who was kneeling in the middle, and said in a deep voice, "In this dispute, it took half a day to make mistakes. It is reasonable for Giung to come to discuss the matter. Due to the behavior of the idle waiters for half a day, Giung cannot do business normally. Therefore, I order half a day's leisure and compensate Giung Pavilion for 3 days running time, which is 1,050 taels of silver, plus 150 taels of cleaning expenses. Furthermore, for half-day leisure, you need to pay for the medical expenses of the injured Giung employee, lost work expenses, etc. This part of the expenses is evidenced by the receipt from the medical clinic. As for the lost wages, it is calculated as 500 yuan a day, and the injured worker will be paid as long as it takes for him to recover. Shopkeeper Han, are you convinced?" Gu Huayu listened to Kui Mingqing's verdict and had the illusion that the Calabash monk judged the Calabash case. Kui Mingqing dared to judge the case like this. Did he have half a day to spare and no backstage? Indeed, after Kui Mingqing received the case, he sent people to investigate, and the feedback came back that he had no background in half a day's work. Han Shi replied, "Sir, the common people are not convinced." Kui Mingqing slapped the gavel in his hand and said sternly, "You are bold and unruly, and you still make excuses after doing evil. Come here and give me 30 slaps." King Yu was surprised and said, "Is this a fight? Is he trying to use subjugation to make a move? Miss, what should I do?" Seeing that the officer was about to step forward to pull Han Shi away, Gu Huayu said, "Slow down." Kui Mingqing glanced at Gu Huayu and said in a deep voice, "Who is it? If you dare to disturb the order of the court, come and let me catch you." Han Shi turned to look at Gu Huayu, leaned forward and said, "Princess." Kui Mingqing was stunned when he heard Han Shi's title. He turned to look at Zhang Ji and asked, "Princess? Which princess?" Zhang Ji shook his head and looked at Gu Huayu with a blank expression. "This princess is very cool." No, he knew all the princesses in the capital. Kui Mingqing turned to Musaxin, and Musaxin also shook his head, indicating that he did not recognize the person in front of him. Kui Mingqing's eyes fell on Gu Huayu again. Gu Huayu had already walked up to Han Shi, looked around, and said in a loud voice, "I am Gu Huayu. I am the Princess Yan Ran who was bestowed upon me by the Emperor not long ago." After Gu Huayu finished speaking, there was an uproar in the lobby. Kui Mingqing looked at Gu Huayu and then at Zhang Ji beside him. He had a bad intuition. Gu Huayu raised her hand and pressed it down, then made a silencing gesture. Suddenly, the whispers stopped, and the lobby was as quiet as the wilderness on a winter night, without a sound. As the Shaiyan of Jingzhou Mansion, Kui Mingqing is naturally concerned about current affairs in the capital. The fact that the emperor granted Hua Yanran the title of princess was the most talked about thing among the people in the capital after dinner. Together with Hua Yanran's experience, the fire in Hua's family 15 years ago, Hua Ling's death, and the mysterious Longjingwei became a tea house the talk of the town nowadays. Therefore, Kui Mingqing has heard about Princess Yanran, but only through his ears, just like the stories told by storytellers in tea houses and restaurants. Kui Mingqing never thought that one day, this legendary princess would stand in front of him and question his judgment in public. Kui Mingqing has been up and down in the officialdom for many years, and he has his own way of controlling emergencies, and he quickly recovered from the shock. Guo Huayu said, "Yanran County is the master of the county. From the order of maintaining the public hall, how can you come here to make fun?" still interfere with the judgment of the official in the public hall. Gu Huayu glanced at Kui Mingqing and sneered. This guy was saying that she didn't understand the rules and blamed her for stretching her hand. Gu Huayu smiled lightly and said, "What Mr. Kui said is inappropriate. Mr. Kui went to court to hear the case, and I came to watch and learn from it. How can I just join in the fun?" After speaking, Gu Huayu looked around at the people watching, and finally cast her eyes on Sui-er, asking, "Are you here to join in the fun?" Sui-er immediately replied, back to the princess, "I'm not here to join in the fun. I'm here to see how Mr. Yin judges the case fairly and justly." Gu Huayu nodded and looked back at Kui Mingqing. Did Mr. Kui hear that? The people who came to watch were not just to watch the excitement. They came to see whether the man sitting under the mirror had a fair heart and whether he was the great master in their hearts. Kui Mingqing felt it was extremely harsh when he heard Gu Huayu's strange words, and asked with a sullen face, "Princess, are you questioning the unfairness of my handling of the case?" Gu Huayu asked without fear, "As for today's case, Mr. Kui dares to swear by the black gauze hat on your head and say frankly in front of everyone that you are not biased at all? Mr. Kui dares to say that you have investigated the case clearly, and with reasonable evidence. Mr. Kui, dare to say that your judgment did not bend the law for personal gain? Your judgment is worthy of the official uniform you wear. Master Kui, as the Yin of Jingzhou Mansion and the official parent of the people in the capital, cannot allow the people to question him. Could it be that Mr. Kui wants to cover up the sky with one hand?" Kui Mingqing gave Gu Huayu the right to speak, and Gu Huayu cherished it so much that he asked several questions in a row, unhurriedly, cadenced, and loud. The eyes of the onlookers shone brightly, and the officials present were trembling. The reason why Kui Mingqing was able to make Gu Huayu speak out was because he expected that she wouldn't be able to say anything. In Kui Mingqing's eyes, Gu Huayu is just a girl who grew up in the countryside. How brave can a little girl be? He has been in the officialdom for more than 20 years, from the local area to the capital, starting from a small county magistrate, to where he is today. He has experienced so many scenes, large and small, that he can't even remember them. It is not an exaggeration to say that he has met countless people, not to mention a little girl. Even the wife of a clan who has been in charge of a large family for many years stands in the court with trepidation and fear, and her words are incoherent. Kui Mingqing never expected that Gu Huayu could be so calm. After Gu Huayu finished speaking, Kui Mingqing was stunned on the spot, not knowing how to answer her words. Zhang Ji saw that the momentum was not right and quickly took over the words. "The princess' words are serious, the words are serious. Master Kui naturally puts fairness first when he hears cases. The facts of the case that we have learned are that Ban Rixian acted unreasonably first. Of course, we have to check whether this is the specific case. Master Kui is asking Shopkeeper Han if he agrees. If Shopkeeper Han is not convinced, he will explain why." After the rest of us listened, we decided who was right and wrong between Ban Rician and Guiyun Pavilion based on what Shopkeeper Han said. Musaxin nodded and said, "Yes, that's what Zhang Kenjun said. This is the process of the trial." Gu Huayu sneered and said without mercy, "You don't have to fool me. I know that you two are just trying to cover up Mr. Kui with your official accent. What is the process of reviewing a case? Are you lying to people or ghosts? Sir Kui's half-day penalty has been calculated. Is this the procedure for reviewing the case? How about I go into the palace tomorrow to ask for an audience with the emperor and ask him if our Daxing system of punishment is like this?" Gu Huayu didn't follow common sense and hit several adults with such a powerful punch that they couldn't react. In the end, they brought out the emperor's Buddha to calm the situation. As soon as Gu Huayu's words came out, the expressions of Kui Mingqing, Zhang Ji, and Musaxin all changed. None of the three of them can be sure whether Gu Huayu will go to the palace to see the emperor tomorrow. They know in their hearts that it is not easy for others to see the emperor, but the princess in front of them is Hualing's daughter. Who is Hualing? Back then, Ying was by the emperor's side, someone who accompanied the emperor. If Gu Huayu really goes to the palace tomorrow and speaks in front of the emperor, their brother's career in the officialdom will be over, and they may even bring trouble to the family. They are all people who have been in the officialdom for many years, and they are all good people. Kui Mingqing gave Musaxin a look. Musaxin immediately smiled and said, "Sit here, princess. Come on, let's sit down and talk." Gu Huayu shook her head, with an expression that said, "I won't be fooled by you." "No, Chief Mu, please tell me if you have anything to say." Musaxin did not force himself and said with a smile, "Today's matter is really according to the procedure. As for the fine that the princess mentioned, it was actually not a real fine. Mr. Kui said that he wanted someone to hit shopkeeper Han's board, but he didn't really want to hit it. The so-called military art is strange. What is virtual is real, what is real is virtual. These are all procedures for reviewing a case, and the purpose is to find out the truth and try not to make an unjust, false, or wrong case." Zhang Ji saw that Musaxin had put things into perspective and quickly nodded in agreement. "It's true, it's true." Kui Mingqing regained his composure and said, "The princess's interruption has made it impossible to continue the trial of my case. Should the princess say something about her behavior? In order to successfully hear the case, irrelevant personnel are not allowed to enter the yamen. Come and clear out the irrelevant people." Kui Mingqing just wanted to get the difficult Gu Huayu out as soon as possible. Immediately, a servant came forward and said to Gu Hua, "Princess, please." Gu Huayu glanced at Kui Mingqing, and said to the officer with a faint smile, "Master Shayan said that we are cleaning up people who have nothing to do with the case. This princess is related to Banri Xian and is not within the scope of the cleaning." End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Rebirth of Space, the lucky girl from a farm family. Author, he would fire every. Chapter 256. Chapter 256, Stealing Business. Kui Mingqing's heart tightened, and Hua Yanran's words made him uneasy. He was entrusted with what happened today. In order not to get into trouble for himself, he privately asked someone to check Bansidiangxian and confirmed that the owner of Bansidiangxian was just a businessman from out of town, so he should come down. What is the relationship between the princess and half-day leisure? Gu Huayu looked at Kui Mingqing, saw that he was slightly nervous, and said with a smile, "Is the relationship between diners okay?" Kui Mingqing was obviously relieved, and immediately raised his official authority and said seriously, "Princess, this is a court, please speak seriously. I still have a case to review, and I would like to ask the princess not to take up everyone's time and move outside the courtroom." After finishing speaking, Kui Mingqing said to the officer, "Why don't you invite the princess out? Hey guys, we're going to drive people away." Without waiting for the bad service to approach, Gu Huayu leaned his lips and ridiculed, "Master Kui is really boring as the master of the county," and then wandered from Wutong Lane to the east of the city to see the Kui people judge the gourd case. Kui Mingqing frowned and asked, "Gourd case? What does the princess mean?" Gu Huayu smiled and said, "It's nothing, even Mr. Kui doesn't understand. Tell Mr. Kui that this princess is the owner of a half-day free business. Mr. Kui, tell me, is this case related to this princess? Does this princess still need to move outside the court?" The court fell silent again, and everyone looked at Gu Huayu in disbelief. Gu Huayu looked at Kui Mingqing, whose face was extremely ugly, with a smile, and then said, "I want to see how Mr. Kui will judge Mr. Kui when he brings people to half-day leisure to cause trouble." As she said that, Gu Huayu stepped aside and said, "King Yu, remember it for me, especially how Master Kui asked and how shopkeeper Huang answered. Tomorrow, you come with me to the palace, and we will go to court. Let the emperor see what happened. King Yu leaned forward and responded, yes, princess, don't worry, I have the best memory. I promise to write it down every word. Gu Huayu suddenly felt that she was quite a villain when she looked at Kui Mingqing, who was livid with anger but could do nothing about her. Gu Huayu was wondering if she should restrain herself. The onlookers murmured, is this person really the princess? He is so courageous and has a perverse temperament. Princess Yan Ran grew up in the countryside, so it's normal for her not to know etiquette. When Gu Huayu heard this, she smiled knowingly. As a person who grew up in the countryside, her true temperament was to do as she pleased. What should she restrain herself from? Kui Mingqing never expected that Gu Huayu would be the boss who had only half-day free time. By accident, he seemed to be involved in the disputes between the Hua family. Gu Huayu said to Kui Mingqing with a half-smile, Master Kui, let's get started. Let shopkeeper Huang tell you how he framed me. Kui Mingqing came back to his senses and said, Princess, this is the court. Gu Huayu interrupted him, I know, this is Mr. Kui's territory. Shut up, Mr. Kui. Please ask Mr. Kui how shopkeeper Huang framed this. I am very curious. Shopkeeper Huang knelt beside Han Shi, his head lowered and silent, feeling ashamed. He is an old man from Giun Pavilion, and Princess Yan Ran is the daughter of the head of the family. Yes, the head of the family, the only head of the house in his heart. When the head of the house was alive, he was just an errand boy, and the head of the house treated them very kindly. When he heard that the head of the family's daughter had returned and was made a princess by the emperor, he was so happy that he drank 2 more glasses of wine. Zhang Ji looked at Kui Mingqing, then at Gu Huayu, and said with a smile, speaking of which, Giun Pavilion is the Hua family's property. It's really a flood that has washed away the Dragon King Temple. One family doesn't know the other. Since it's all your Hua family's own, let's talk about it slowly behind closed doors. Gu Huayu raised her voice and interrupted Zhang Ji, Master Zhang, what you said is wrong. Businessmen pay attention to one code and one code. Giun Pavilion is now in the hands of Commander Hua Ruiming Hua, not in the hands of me, Hua Yan Ran. Dear brothers have to settle accounts openly, not to mention that Commander Hua and I are not the same parents. Since today's matter has come to the Yamen, Giun Pavilion must give an explanation in front of several adults. If shopkeeper Huang can't make the decision, then send someone to ask Commander Hua to come over and ask Commander Hua to give an explanation. Shopkeeper Huang turned his head and looked behind him, his eyes fell on a man wearing a cigarette ash gown, and asked, Deputy Ambassador Yang, what do you think? Everyone's eyes fell on Deputy Envoy Yang, waiting for his reply. When Sui-er saw Deputy Envoy Yang, his eyes dropped and his hands clenched tightly unconsciously. King Yu stood next to Sui-er and turned around to ask him who this person was. He caught the coldness in Sui-er's eyes and asked in a low voice, what? Do you know him? Sui-er nodded slightly and said 2 words, enemy. King Yu said softly, I know, let's talk about it later. As long as he is in the capital, we have plenty of time to take revenge. Sui-er nodded. Deputy Ambassador Yang did not expect that half a day's leisure would be Hua Yan Ran's property. With Hua Yan Ran's special status, he knew that the adults present would not dare to judge the case randomly today. Then Deputy Envoy Yang said, the Commander-in-Chief is busy with official duties these days and has no time to come here. Shopkeeper Huang impulsively led people to look for him without understanding the whole story. It really shouldn't be the case. What happened today is that Giun Pavilion did something wrong, and we admit our mistake. Please propose conditions to the princess. As long as the conditions are reasonable, we will try our best to satisfy the princess. Gu Huayu narrowed her eyes slightly. It seemed that this person's position in Giun Pavilion was not low. Gu Huayu knew in her heart that just this matter today would not bring down Gyung. Since you can't defeat him, maximize the benefits, accept it as soon as it's good, and try this person's authority by the way. Then he said, first, let the people from Gyun Pavilion clean it for half a day, and shopkeeper Han will tell you how clean it is. Second, because something happened in Gyun Pavilion for no reason, it caused half a day's free time and was unable to do business normally. Based on the daily turnover of 2,000 taels of silver, Gyun Pavilion had to pay 6,000 taels of silver for half a day's free time in 3 days. 3. People from Gyun Pavilion came to cause trouble today. Gyun Pavilion will compensate the damaged household items according to the price. For the injured workers, Gyun Pavilion will pay for medical expenses, nutrition expenses, and lost work expenses. Seeing Gu Huayu stop, Deputy Ambassador Yang asked, Princess, are there any more? Gu Huayu said, no, that's all. Deputy Ambassador Yang nodded and said, I agree. Seeing that Deputy Envoy Yang agreed, Gu Huayu turned to Musaixin and said, since Gyun Pavilion has no objection to the conditions I proposed, please kindly ask Master Mu to write down a copy of the contract and keep it as a certificate. Musaixin nodded in agreement. Musaixin wrote it in triplicate. Gyun Pavilion, Banri Xian, and the Yamen each held one copy. Gu Huayu took the contract, glanced at it, and handed it to Han Shi, shopkeeper Han, keep it. You'll have to rely on it to get money later. Deputy Ambassador Yang said, there is no need for shopkeeper Han to come to the door. Shopkeeper Huang will deliver the silver to the door tomorrow. Gu Huayu looked at Deputy Envoy Yang, but did not answer. She turned to Kui Mingqing and others and said, thank you for your hard work today. I was deeply impressed by the deceitful practices of these soldiers. I have learned from you today. Farewell. Zhang Ji looked at Gu Huayu's leaving figure and murmured, Princess Yan Ran, it's not easy. Musaixin took over the words, Gyung asked for 1,500 taels of silver. The princess turned around and asked for 6,000 taels of silver. Her tone was so strong that there was no room for negotiation. A little girl, where does she get the confidence? Zhang Ji looked at Kui Mingqing and said, we all underestimated her. Kui Mingqing nodded, a girl who has not yet had her hair cut off can handle herself in court. How many people can do that? Zhang Ji said quietly, I have to tell my family when I go back to be more polite when meeting this princess in the future. Gu Huayu led everyone out and said to Han Shi, let everyone take 3 days off. We will let everyone come back after the people from Gyung have cleaned up the shop. Han Shi nodded in agreement, turned around and gave orders to everyone. Gu Huayu turned around to talk to Sui Er, and saw Su clenching her hands and staring at Deputy Ambassador Yang and his party. Gu Huayu frowned and said, no. Sui Er nodded, and Gu Huayu took a look at the people in Gyun Pavilion. Among the group of people, Deputy Ambassador Yang and shopkeeper Huang were the older ones, and the rest were mostly in their teens or 20s. He asked, who do you know? Shopkeeper Huang and Deputy Envoy Yang. Sui Er bit his back teeth and whispered, Yang Jian. Gu Huayu looked at Yang Jian, who was wearing a smoky gray gown. He was of medium height and thin, and was not conspicuous in the crowd. Just when Gu Huayu was confused, Sui Er said, Yang Jian used to be someone close to my brother, and my brother trusted him very much. Gu Huayu's eyes darkened and she turned to look over. Yang Jian had already mounted the horse and was about to leave. Gu Huayu stared at Yang Jian and asked, is he from Suxing? Sui Er saw Yang Jian was leaving and planned to chase after him, but was caught by Gu Huayu. Sui Er turned around and looked at Gu Huayu, Princess, please follow me and have a look. Gu Huayu shook her head, no, your mood is wrong. Let King Yu follow him. Since this man is in the capital, he can't run away, so don't worry for a while. Let's go back and discuss it. King Yu said, listen to the princess, You go back first, and I will follow you to take a look. Su-er nodded. When they returned to Wutong Lane, it was already dark. Gu Huayu went to take a shower, and Liao Dong came over and said, "Princess, Su-er and the others are waiting for you to have dinner." Gu Huayu nodded and walked towards the dining room. After dinner, Gu Huayu and her group went to the study. Wang Gu asked about things in the east of the city, and Han Shi gave a brief summary. Gu Huayu's eyes fell on Su-er and asked, "How much do you know about Yang Jian's situation?" Su-er shook his head, "I was young at that time and didn't know much." Deputy Ambassador Yang is Yang Jian, absolutely right. We haven't seen each other for 15 or 16 years. How can you be sure that Deputy Ambassador Yang is Yang Jian? Qing Yu asked. Su-er replied, "There is a mole under the right corner of his mouth. I can recognize it at a glance." Gu Huayu nodded and asked, "Do you remember how long ago he came to work with Su Xing?" Su-er shook his head and said, "As long as I can remember, Yang Jian has been by my brother's side." King Zhu said, "King Yu is back." Everyone looked at the door. King Yu entered the room and greeted everyone. Gu Huayu asked, "You haven't eaten yet? Go and eat first." King Yu shook his head, "No, I'll squat at the door of Huafu to keep watch." The younger one ate a bowl of noodles at a roadside noodle shop. Su-er asked, "Does Yang Jian live in Huafu?" King Yu shook his head, "No, he lives in the back alley between Baekangmen Wangxiang Mansion and Li Mansion." Gu Huayu said in surprise, "He lives over at Baekangmen." King Yu nodded, "Yes, I followed him all the way." Yang Jian first went to the Huafu on West Street. He stayed in the Huafu for about 2/4 of an hour. After leaving the Huafu, he went to the back street of Baekangmen Lane. Han Shi said, "Baekangmen is not close to West Street. He obeys Huaru Iming's orders. Wouldn't it be more convenient to live here on West Street?" Wang Qin nodded and said, "Yes. Why did you live in the Baekangmen area? Are there branches of Giun Pavilion and Baofeng Bank near Baekangmen?" King Zhu thought for a while and shook his head, "No, the closest one is Baofeng Bank on Maxing Street." Qing Yu took the words and said, "In terms of distance, West Street is closer to Maxing Street. Why would he sacrifice the near for the far?" Wang Qin said, "Good question, why does he want to go far away instead of the near? It's unreasonable." Gu Huayu said, "Starting tomorrow, let people keep an eye on you." Su-er nodded in agreement, "Okay." Wang Qin said, "With this commotion today, everyone knows that half a day's leisure belongs to the princess. Let's be more cautious in the future." Gu Huayu nodded, "Yes, it's always better to be cautious." Hua Mansion, after Yang Jian left, Hua Ruiming fell into deep thought. He asked people to check for a long time, but they couldn't find out who the owner of Half-Day Leisure was. He never expected that Half-Day Leisure was owned by that stinky girl. In a short period of time, she opened more than 10 houses in the capital, all of which were located near Giun Pavilion. Why did she do this? What does she want to do? Mrs. Lu saw that her son had not gone to eat, so she came to the front yard. "You are here, where is Brother Ming?" asked Lu. And Su leaned back and said, "Go back to me, madam, I'm in the house." Mrs. Lu glanced at the study and asked, "Brother Ming is meeting guests?" And Su shook his head and said, "No, I am alone in the house." "A person is in the house? What happened?" Mrs. Lu said and went into the house. And Su replied, "I don't know. After Deputy Yang left, I was going to go in and clean up, but I sent him out." Lu pushed the door open and went in. There was no light in the room, and the dark room made people's eyes dark. "Why don't you light the light?" "And Su, come in and light the light." Ms. Lu walked to the desk and saw her son sitting back in the chair by the light of Ensu's lighter, looking at her blankly. Mrs. Liu's heart tightened and she asked, "Brother Ming, What's wrong with you? Huaruiming said confusedly, what is she going to do? Mrs. Lu was stunned and asked, who wants to do anything? Zikiu. What do you care about what she does? Just let her be happy. I tell you, don't always protect Chen Shui. The more you protect Chen Shui, the more Zikiu will. The resentment in my heart is getting heavier. Lu Zikiu went to Yulan Lane again in the afternoon to find trouble with Chen Shui, and learned that Chen Shui had sold the house. Lu Zikiu thought Huaruiming had hidden Chen Shui, so he lost his temper when he returned to the house and went to bed without eating supper. Huaruiming shook his head, I'm not talking about Zikiu, but Yan Ran. Mrs. Lu sat down and asked, what happened to Nizai? What did she do? Huaruiming told Mr. Lu about what he had to do during the half-day. Mrs. Lu straightened her back when she heard this, and asked with a frown, what is she going to do? She has opened so many shops, and they are all located near Giun Pavilion. Isn't it obvious that she wants to compete with our Giun Pavilion for business? End of this chapter. The Rebirth of Space, the lucky girl from a farm family. Author, he would fire every. Chapter 257. Chapter 257 Impatient. 10 shops, where did she get so much money? Could it be that all the rewards given to her by the emperor were used to open a shop? She thought opening a shop was as easy as drinking cold water. Huaruiming said with a sad face, I don't know where she got the money, but it is obvious that she is competing for business with Giun. I don't understand why she would do this. Speaking of which, we are also a family. Could it be that she has some misunderstanding about us? Liu's eyes flickered and she said, what misunderstanding can there be between her and us? Huaruiming looked at Mrs. Lu and said, Yan Ran doesn't suspect that we took her things away, does she? Ms. Lu said plausibly, what nonsense are you talking about? How come we have taken something from her? Everything in the Hua family was burned down in a fire back then. Everything we have now was earned by your father. Why is she so hostile to us? Yes, that's right. On the day I first found out her identity, I went to Wutong Lane to pick her up. She said something wrong. When she looked at me, her eyes were full of disgust. Ordinarily, she and I had been quarrelsome before. We had dinner together. Lu Shi caught the information in Huaruiming's words and asked, have you met that Nizai before? When did it happen? Why didn't I hear you say it? Huaruiming said impatiently, that is all in the past, I want to find out why she is hostile to me. She came to the capital, and within a few months, she opened 10 shops at once. How did she do it? How did she, a little girl, do it? Who was helping her behind the scenes? Huaruiming leaned back on his chair, looked up and asked a series of questions. Mrs. Lu was shocked when she heard what her son said. That's right, a girl who grew up in a ravine, how did she do it? Obviously, Hua Yan Ran would never be able to do it on her own. So who is helping her? Before Mrs. Lu could figure it out, Huaruiming continued, she has a rouge shop on Daowen Street, a house on Wutong Lane, and a village outside the city. These were all arranged by the emperor before he made her the princess. I asked people to inquire and found out that she bought the shop on Daowen Street, the house on Wutong Lane and the Zhuangzi outside the city. She couldn't buy the house, the village, or the shop for less than 100,000 taels of silver. Where did she get so much money? You should know that her adoptive father and mother's family were so poor that they didn't even have enough to eat. Lu asked tentatively, could it be Lulu who was helping her? For her, Lulu cancelled all the good marriages in Wangxiangfu. It's not unusual to do this for her. Huaruiming shook his head, it's not unusual. Even if Lulu is willing to help her, he must be capable. Lulu was not the head of the family in the British government, and his monthly allowance was fixed. Zigzun and the others only have 50 taels of silver per month. Even if Lulu received the regular money from the British government and the Chinquo government at the same time, he would only have 100 taels of silver per month. After 1 year, there are 1,200 taels. Even if Lulu spends nothing, it will take 10 years to save 12,000 taels. The British government cannot provide money for the people under Lulu. These people depend on Lulu to support himself. Lulu had to support so many people, so it was impossible for him not to spend money. A few years ago, Lulu went out to travel, spending money like water when he was away from home. It is conceivable that Lulu cannot be rich. Mrs. Lu frowned and said, if it's not Lulu, where does her money come from? Who is her sponsor? Huaruiming felt a sense of enlightenment when he heard the word gold master. Said, the money owner, this must be the case. There must be a money owner behind Hua Yanran, otherwise, where did she get the money from? Lu Shi nodded clearly, yes, that must be the case. Because of her good looks, she committed herself to a rich man. No wonder she didn't come back when we picked her up. If she came back, the financial institution would want to see her. How inconvenient it would be. The more Lu talked, the more he felt that he was right. Huaruiming nodded and said, that must be the case. Only in this way can it be explained. I cursed in my heart, I still thought she was a good product, but she was just as despicable as she didn't know. Lu Shi looked at Huaruiming and asked, that Nizai opened her shop near Giun Pavilion. Does she want to steal our business? Did we recruit her or provoke her? The capital is so big, where would it be better for her to open? She chose to open it near our shop. Why can't she be so rude to others? This little is so bad. Is our business affected? Huaruiming said angrily, she specifically targets us, can we not be affected? Judging from the letters sent back from shopkeepers, every shop has been affected. Lu said angrily, what should we do? We have to find a way to go back. What are you thinking of? Is there any good idea? The shop in the east of the city has returned. Instead of getting rid of her, she has been compensated with 6,000 to 7,000 taels of silver. It's okay not to talk about this matter. When it comes to this matter, Huaruiming becomes a little angry. Why do you have to pay 6,000 to 7,000 taels of silver to go out? What's going on? Lu asked. Huaruiming explained the matter in a few words. After hearing this, Mrs. Lu said, Kui Mingqing is a young yin of Jingzhou Prefecture, how can she be allowed to do whatever she wants? Huaruiming said, Kui Mingqing can't be blamed for this. Hua Yanran moved the emperor out. Who dares to mess around? Then what should we do? Just let her bully us. Huaruiming sighed and said, Deputy Envoy Yang came here just now. He said that we should stay put for now and see what Hua Yanran will do next. Ms. Lu asked, let's see what she does. Hasn't she already opened a shop to grab business? Do we still want to watch? Until we see her opening shops one by one, and watching our shops closing one by one. Isn't robbing business the same as robbing money? Thinking of her white money being robbed, Ms. Lu was so anxious that she wanted to steal the guy and beat him up. Huaruiming said, Mom, don't worry, everyone is thinking of ideas. Lan Jingwei relies on Giun Pavilion and Baofeng Bank for support. If there is a problem with Giun Pavilion, Lan Jingwei will be most affected. The Dragon Shadow Guard is the Emperor's Dragon Shadow Guard, and the Emperor will not let anything happen to it. After hearing Huaruiming's words, Mrs. Lu felt a little more at ease and said, Brother Ming, write a note quickly and go see the Emperor tomorrow and report this matter as soon as possible. Huaruiming thought for a while, nodded and said, my mother-in-law reminded me that this matter must be reported to the Emperor earlier. After finishing speaking, Huaruiming stood up and said, I'm hungry, let's eat first. Then write the book after eating. When Mrs. Lu heard that her son was hungry, she immediately stood up and said, yes, let's eat first. I'll ask someone to serve the food. You go and see Zikio and take her to eat with you. Huaruiming said impatiently, didn't Anyang say she should rest? I just let her sleep when she is tired. Why should I call her? Lu Shi pushed Huaruiming and said, go if you are told. Why are you talking so much? Go and come back quickly. Huaruiming muttered, but still followed Liu's wishes and went to Lu Zikio's yard. In the palace of Jianqing, the emperor listened to the man in black reporting what happened in the east office of the city, and said, I know, you can go down. The man in black retreats. The emperor picked up his pen and continued to review the papers, while eunuch Gao stood beside him. After a long time, the emperor finished approving the papers in his hand, stood up and stretched. He opened his mouth and asked, what do you think of this matter in the east of the city? Eunuch Gao said, the princess surprised me. The emperor pursed his lips slightly and said, I am also surprised. This girl is bolder than me. Eunuch Gao smiled and bowed and said, yes, Commander Hua is too regular. The emperor sat back on the dragon chair, took the teacup handed over by Eunuch Gao, lowered his head to sip the tea, then handed the teacup back to Eunuch Gao's hand, and leaned back to find a comfortable position for himself. Murmured, yes, Hualing is too well behaved. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gone like this. How many people around this girl are from the Long Shadow Guard? Eunuch Gao said, come back to me. Han Shi, the shopkeeper of half-day free in the east of the city, is the favorite disciple of Zhu Mingdao, the life chaser in Longjing Wei, Zhu Lao. He has been passed down by Zhu Lao and is known as the Little Life Chaser. Always by Mr. Zhu's side. Until 5 years ago, when something happened to the Hua family's old house in Jiangnan, he escaped, and then followed the princess to Beijing. Wang Qin, who managed the rouge shop on Daowen Street for the princess, was once a well-known Jinyuyi in Hangzhou. He was a master of light skills and a good hand with hidden weapons. Wang Qin studied under Lu Yiyi of Longjing Wei. After Lu Yiyi traveled around, Wang Qin followed Mr. Zhu. Wang Qin, Ruan Wu and Mi Chen all followed Mr. Zhu to Shishan to meet the princess, and then stayed with the princess. At the moment, Huada and Sui are the only ones with whom the princess has no trace of their past. The emperor nodded slightly. In this world, there are those who judge the Lord, and there are also those who loyally protect the Lord. If you can't find out, just be patient and wait. One day you will find out. Just like the situation in front of me, it has been silent for 15 years. No matter what methods I used before, they kept silent. I thought I would never be able to wait in my lifetime. I am very much looking forward to this girl. You will go out to the palace tomorrow and give her a fish charm. Let people know that Yan Ran does not need to ask for permission to enter the palace. Eunuch Gao bowed and said, yes, I obey the order. The emperor stood up, walked to the chess table, sat down, looked at the chess score, reached out and picked up a black stone and placed it on the chessboard. He looked up at Eunuch Gao and asked, Lao Wu went to the British government's residence today. Eunuch Gao leaned forward and said, back to the emperor, today the prince went to the Yinggong mansion. After arriving at the Yinggong mansion, he first went to the Yinggong's courtyard. After leaving the Yinggong's yard, he went to Lu Yes' yard. In Lu Yes, Yuanzi sat there for about a quarter of an hour, and then went to Mrs. Yang's yard for a walk. After the prince came out of the British Duke's mansion, he went directly back to Prince Yen's mansion. The emperor listened to Eunuch Gao's words while playing chess. After Eunuch Gao finished speaking, the emperor did not speak. Eunuch Gao stood by the side and said nothing. After a while, the emperor put down the white chess piece in his hand, grabbed another black piece, held it in his hand, and said, Lao Wu is a little anxious. Eunuch Gao did not answer the question. He had served the emperor for many years. He knew that the emperor was not asking him this question. The emperor dropped the black stones in his hand on the chessboard. After a while, he said, follow his wish and ask someone to come in and draw up the decree. Let Lai Shun go to the court tomorrow. Eunuch Gao bowed and said, yes. The old slave will ask someone to come in right now. The emperor stood up and said, go. Eunuch Gao exited the imperial study. After a while, people from the Hanlin Academy came in to draft the marriage decree. Then exit the imperial study room. Eunuch Gao put the imperial edict away. The emperor said, tomorrow you go to see Yan Ran, and stop by to see Zikin. Take the 1,000-year-old ginseng that was sent as tribute to the Zhou dynasty last time, and tell Zikin that I will wait for him to come to the palace and play chess with me. Eunuch Gao bowed and said, yes, I obey the order. The Prime Minister's mansion is indeed a top-notch wealthy family. After the corpse dumping case, there was an uproar outside, but it was a different scene in the Prime Minister's mansion. The whole house was as orderly as usual, and there was no panic. Of course, this is just an appearance. The servants who are waiting closely can detect the master's uneasiness. Mrs. Shangguan looked forward to it from morning to afternoon, until the sun set, but she did not expect the imperial edict to confer marriage. Mrs. Shangguan said to Mother Yang, I will go to the Buddhist hall to recite sutras. The Prime Minister will come over and ask the Prime Minister to wait for me here. Mother Yang bent her knees and said, yes, I understand. Wang Piyun walked around in the yard countless times, but finally couldn't hold it any longer and turned around and walked out. Grandma Guan hurriedly shouted, Miss, where are you going? Wang Piyun replied without looking back, go to mother. Mammy Guan caught up, took Wang Piyun's hand and said, Miss, the old lady has an order. People in each courtyard can only stay in their own courtyard today, and they are not allowed to run around in each courtyard. People in each court perform their duties and are not allowed to gather together to chat. Anyone who disobeys the order will be punished with a stick of 20 large boards and then sent to Zhuangzi. Wang Piyun stopped, turned around and asked, did something happen today? Grandma Guan shook her head and said, I don't know either. Grandma Yang came here personally to give these instructions. I don't dare to ask. Wang Piyun hesitated and said, I'll go to Anfu Hall to pay my respects to my grandmother. Grandma Guan grabbed Wang Piyun who was about to leave and begged, Miss, Grandma Yang said that the old lady is busy these days, so there is no need for the lady to go and say hello in the morning and evening. Wang Piyun stared at Granny Guan and asked, you don't even need to say hello, with a look of disbelief on his face. Grandma Guan nodded, yes, there is no need to say hello in the morning or evening. Wang Piyun nodded solemnly and said, something must have happened in the house. I don't care. I have to go to Anyang's place to see if anything happens. I will take care of it. Aunt Guan didn't listen to Wang Piyun at all. She held Wang Piyun tightly with both hands and begged, Miss, no one can violate the old lady's order. I don't want to go to the village. I want to stay with the young lady and serve her miss for life. The young lady took pity on the old slave and stayed in the courtyard waiting for the old lady's call. Okay. As she begged Wang Piyun, Grandma Guan said to the maid and woman beside her, what are you doing just standing there? Do you want to get hit by the board and then go to the village? The maid immediately knelt down and begged, Miss, I beg you to stay here. Wang Piyun was very anxious. Looking at the servant kneeling on the ground, he stamped his feet angrily and walked back helplessly. Mrs. Shangguan recited the sutra once and came out. Seeing that there were only Aunt Yang and a few servants in the room, she asked, isn't the Prime Minister here yet? Mother Yang leaned forward and said, go back to me, madam, the Prime Minister hasn't come yet. Mrs. Shangguan asked, has the Prime Minister returned to his residence? Aunt Yang shook her head and replied, back to the old lady, I told the concierge that if the Prime Minister comes back to the house, let them go to Anfu Hall to report. The concierge has not come back to report. It seems that the Prime Minister has not returned to the house. End of this chapter. The Rebirth of Space, the Lucky Girl from a Farm Family. Author, he would fire every. Chapter 258. Chapter 258, Power should be the backing. Mrs. Shangguan nodded, walked to the soft couch and sat down. Mother Yang said, "It's already midnight, old lady, would you like to eat something first?" Mrs. Shangguan thought for a while and said, "It's hot and I have no appetite. Give me half a bowl of japonica rice porridge." Mother Yang turned around to give orders. After a while, a servant came in with porridge. Mother Yang took it and handed it to Mrs. Shangguan. Mrs. Shangguan finished her porridge and looked up at the hourglass. 2/4 of an hour passed, but the concierge still didn't come to report. Mrs. Shangguan waited until the end of Su, but the king still had not returned to the house. Mother Yang advised, "Old madam, it's getting late, you should have a rest." Mrs. Shangguan understood that the more trouble she encountered, the more she had to stay calm. She nodded, "Okay, rest," and asked them to come in and serve. The maid and mother-in-law were ordered to come in and help Mrs. Shangguan wash herself. Until the 2nd quarter of the 1st lunar month, the king returned to the palace. He heard from his servants that Mrs. Shangguan had rested, so she rested in the study in the outer courtyard. Gu Huayu walked Eunuch Gao to the door, watched Eunuch Gao's car go away, and then turned and walked into the courtyard. Sui-er looked at the fish charm in Gu Huayu's hand and felt it looked familiar, as if he had seen it somewhere. Fugui said, "This fish charm is the same as Lu Liuyu's." After being reminded by Fugui, Sui-er remembered that he had seen Lu Ziqin wear it in Shishan. Fugui then asked, "Princess, what does the emperor mean by giving the fish talisman?" "Well done, why did the emperor give the princess the fish talisman?" Gu Huayu looked at the fish talisman in her hand, and she was also wondering why the emperor gave her the fish talisman. At first, she was willing to reveal her life experience just to make it easier to take care of her grandmother and the others. After revealing her life experience, the emperor gave her the honorable title of princess, which was a great gift to her. Why did the emperor give her the fish charm again for no reason? You have to know yourself, you are just the orphan of the emperor's old minister, and you are a female prostitute. "Princess, does the emperor like you?" Qingyu opened his mouth and asked. No wonder Qingyu thinks too much, he is accompanying his master every day and has seen too many people who want to mislead his master. Wang Qin raised his hand to Qingyu, "Shut your mouth, what are you talking about? How many heads do you have to chop off if you dare to speculate on the holy wool? What kind of beauty has your majesty not seen? The emperor is really interested in the princess. He doesn't need to give the fish charm in a roundabout way, but he won't just carry the princess into the palace." Qingyu raised his hand to cover his head, looked at Gu Huayu timidly, and whispered, "It's so good, what kind of fish charm did the emperor give you? I have to think about it." Wang Qin raised his hand again and scolded, "Are you still talking nonsense? Shi Niang is right, the princess has indulged you too much, allowing you to speak freely and not knowing what to say and what not to say. Gu Huayu has lived in modern times for more than 20 years, and has long since accepted the idea that everyone is equal. She treats everyone without distinction and is extremely casual. In the mansion, everyone is afraid of Shi Niang, but not their master." Wang Qin continued, "There was an incident in the east of the city yesterday, and today the emperor sent someone to deliver the fish charm. I thought that the emperor should support the princess." Gu Huayu asked, "Why does the emperor want to support me? Giun Pavilion is the property of Lan Jingwei, who obeys the emperor's orders. We are facing Giun Pavilion, not the emperor. Is it okay for the emperor to support those who come against him? Leaving aside the issue of support or not, let's just say that early this morning, Eunuch Gao sent a fish charm. In other words, the emperor knew everything about what happened in the east of the city yesterday afternoon and last night. Then does the emperor know everything we have been doing these days? At this point, Gu Huayu felt a chill on her back and couldn't help but shudder. Just imagine, what does it feel like to have a pair of eyes watching you behind your back whenever you do anything? The expressions of several people became solemn. They had done a lot of big things recently. Sui-er said, so, maybe this fish charm is a warning to us. Gu Huayu nodded, this possibility cannot be ruled out. Wang Qin took over and said, in the future, we will act more cautiously. Han Shi said, no matter how careful you are, how can you hide what the emperor wants to know? Gu Huayu asked back, as for the father's case, is the emperor aware of it or not? Han Shi knew that he had made a mistake, so he bowed and said, I'm sorry, I was so arbitrary. Uncle Han, there is no need to apologize, I just want to know whether the emperor is aware of it or not. Wang Qin said, yesterday's incident made a big fuss, and it's normal for the emperor to know about it. As for the affairs of the head of the family, I prefer that the emperor does not know about it. After all, the emperor is also a human being, not an omnipotent bodhisattva. Perhaps, the emperor was also secretly investigating what happened back then. Sui-er nodded and said, I don't think the emperor has much trust in the current Long Shadow Guard. The emperor noticed the princess's intention, so he helped the princess. Gu Huayu nodded, maybe, let's not speculate on others and do our own thing. If we don't wait, we won't be disappointed. The emperor gave this fish talisman, no matter what the old man's intention is, I regard it as supporting me. Let us accept this divine grace and investigate my father's case carefully. The emperor has ignored the affairs of the Hua family for more than 10 years. In Gu Huayu's heart, she had some resentment towards the emperor. The news that Gu Huayu received a fish talisman from the emperor spread like wildfire, and the shock of every family in Beijing was no less than a bolt from the blue. Kui Mingqing, Zhangji, and Mu Zixin were sitting around having tea after listening to the report from their subordinates. The three of them froze on the spot. Mu Zixin was the first to come to his senses, looked at Kui Mingqing and said, Old Kui, we are in trouble. All three of them have been in the officialdom for many years, so they naturally understand what the emperor meant by giving the princess the fish charm at this moment. Zhang Ji said with a look of despair, the emperor asked eunuch Gao to go there in person, just to tell us that what happened yesterday is clear to the emperor. Is this a warning to us? Zhang Ji regretted that his government affairs assessment had been outstanding for 3 consecutive years, and he was aiming to be promoted to another level by the end of the year. Yesterday's incident has been reported to the emperor. Not to mention the promotion, whether he can keep his current rank is a question. Kui Mingqing said apologetically, I'm sorry, it was me who dragged you two down. Before his subordinates came in to report, Kui Mingqing did not take what happened yesterday to heart. There is a cousin in the family who is the minister of the Ministry of Personnel, and there is also Wang Xiang, a mentor, who can give some advice. Even these trivial matters can't be wiped out. Isn't all these years of officialdom in vain? This matter happened to be brought before the emperor, which made him extremely frustrated. Zhang Ji felt annoyed and said, there is no need to say this. We need to be more careful in our actions in the future. Lao Kui, have you accepted Commander Hua's favor? Kui Mingqing smiled and said, that's about it. One of Commander Hua's subordinates said hello to me. Zhang Ji and Mu Zixin didn't ask any more questions. After drinking 2 cups of tea, they each went about their business. Hua Ruiming handed the note to the palace early in the morning, and the chamberlain asked him to go back and wait. Hua Ruiming did not wait for the emperor to summon him when he returned, but he did wait for the news that the emperor had given Gu Huayu a fish talisman. He was so angry that he overturned the table and said angrily, what do you mean, Your Majesty? Do you think she didn't hurt Giun Pavilion enough? You even gave her a fish charm. Why don't you praise her to the sky? Just pack up Giun Pavilion, give it to her. And Su turned pale with fright, sent the servants around him away, and then said, "Master, are you willing to die? That is the emperor's wish." Huaruiming looked at Ensu angrily. "I know it's the emperor's intention, why can't I just vent it at home?" Ensu looked around and stepped to the side. "Okay, let me vent my anger first. When I am done venting, I will take care of it later." Huaruiming glared at Ensu and walked away. Ensu hurriedly followed. "Master, where are you going?" Huaruiming said, "Get the car ready, I'll go to Wuitong Lane." Ensu became anxious and asked, "Sir, what are you doing in Wuitong Lane? You don't have to worry about it." Gu Huayu was talking to Wang Qin in the study when the concierge came in and said, "Princess, Commander Hua wants to see you." Gu Huayu and Wang Qin looked at each other. Wang Qin asked, "Why is he here?" Gu Huayu shook her head, "I don't know. Take him to the living room and I'll see him later." The servants retreat. Wang Qin asked, "Princess, I will accompany you there." Gu Huayu shook her head, "No, you go about your business. Make the form as I told you and make the budget first." "Okay, I understand. Princess, please go and do your work first." Gu Huayu put down what she was holding, got up and went to the meeting hall. Huaruiming came over in a fierce manner. When he arrived at Wuitong Lane, most of his anger had dissipated. Now that he saw Gu Huayu's presence, his anger had completely dissipated, leaving only a flattering look on his face. He didn't know what was wrong with him, but when he saw the beautiful flowers, he felt better for no reason. "Yan Ran is here, come and sit here." Gu Huayu looked at Huaruiming, who was mainly a guest, and asked calmly, "Commander Hua, is there anything going on today?" Huaruiming said with a smile, yes, there is something." "Yan Ran will sit down first, sit down and talk slowly." Gu Huayu walked to the main seat, sat down, and asked, "What's the matter?" Huaruiming said, "I heard someone reported the incident in the east of the city last night, and my brother came here specifically to apologize to you today. I didn't know that Half Dacian was your shop, Yan Ran. If brother knew that Half Dacian was yours, why would brother let people attack you? My brother did something wrong. Please forgive me, Yan Ran." Huaruiming said, his eyes looking at Gu Huayu dishonestly. Gu Huayu saw him looking at her chest lustfully and knew that his mind was not pure. He just said, "Nothing, Gyun Pavilion has already paid the money, half a day's leisure is worth it. Commander Hua doesn't need to make a trip." Huaruiming smiled and said, "Yan Ran's words are obvious. We are a family. If there is such a big misunderstanding, it is both reasonable and reasonable for the brother to leave." Gu Huayu bowed slightly and said, "Thank you, Commander Hua. I have received your apology. If there is nothing else, please come back." At the beginning of the conversation, Gu Huayu unexpectedly issued an eviction order. Huaruiming felt a little unhappy, and the smile on his face froze, and he said, "Brother, I haven't come to see Yan Ran for a long time." Gu Huayu didn't wait for him to finish speaking. "It's a bad time for Commander Hua to come. I'm busy and don't have time to accompany Commander Hua." Huaruiming said, "It doesn't matter. If anything happens to Yan Ran, go and do your business. Brother, you can take care of yourself. You don't have to worry about me." Gu Huayu looked at Huaruiming and said, "Okay, you can do as you like." When Gu Huayu returned to the study, Wang Qin said, "Send him away. What is he doing here?" Gu Huayu walked to the table and sat down, and said, "No, I'm in the living room. I came here specifically to apologize." Wang Qin stopped what he was doing and said in surprise, "You left him in the living room and came here alone." Gu Huayu said, "Otherwise? Do you want me to stay with him? I'm busy and don't have time." "You said you were busy and he still didn't leave," Wang Qin asked. Gu Huayu nodded, "It's hard to understand, isn't it? Is it so idle to be a commander? Wang Qin shook his head. How do I know this? I have never been a commander. At this point, Wang Qin suddenly thought of something and said, Princess, do you think Commander Hua's position as commander is empty? Gu Huayu thought for a while, nodded and said, it's very possible. After speaking, the two looked at each other and said, try. Gu Huayu stood up and said, you continue to work, I'm going shopping. Wang Qin asked, do you need me to compensate? Gu Huayu shook her head, no, he doesn't dare to do anything to me. Gu Huayu came out of the study and said to King Yu, get the car ready, let's go to Daowen Street. King Yu bowed down and turned around to prepare the car. Gu Huayu walked to the living room and saw Hua Ruiming leaning on the chair and smiling stupidly. Gu Huayu raised her hand and knocked on the door. Hua Ruiming opened his eyes and looked over. He saw Gu Huayu standing at the door. He immediately sat upright and asked, Yan Ran, aren't you busy? Gu Huayu nodded and said, I'm going to the shop on Daowen Street. Come over and tell you. Okay, I understand. If you have something to do, just go about your business, Hua Ruiming said. Gu Huayu glanced at Hua Ruiming, said nothing, turned and walked into the yard. Hua Ruiming suddenly reacted, chased to the door, and asked, Yan Ran, you said you were going out. Gu Huayu stopped and turned to look at Hua Ruiming. Yes, I want to go to the shop on Daowen Street. Hua Ruiming immediately asked, then when will you come back? Gu Huayu shook her head and said, I don't know. I went to the shop and also went shopping. Hua Ruiming said, I have nothing to do today, so I will go shopping with you. Yan Ran, let me tell you, I am familiar with the capital. Gu Huayu waited for Hua Ruiming to catch up before walking forward. As she walked, she said, would you like to go shopping with me and not delay your work? You are the commander of the Long Shadow Guard. Hua Ruiming's smile faltered and he said, as for the Long Shadow Guards, they will handle the small matters and only come to me for the big ones. In such a peaceful and prosperous age, there are no big things. So, I have nothing to do. Gu Huayu didn't ask any more questions. When she saw King Yu driving out, she walked towards the carriage. Before getting into the car, Gu Huayu turned around and asked, how did you get here? Hua Ruiming pointed to the carriage at the door, I came by car. Gu Huayu glanced at the door and said, okay, let's get in the car. Hua Ruiming smiled and responded, okay. He was about to get into Gu Huayu's car. King Yu grabbed Hua Ruiming's collar and pulled him away. Hua Ruiming turned to glare at Qing Yu and was about to scold him when Gu Huayu said, first, I asked you to get into your own car. Hua Ruiming saw Gu Huayu's face sinking, and did not bother to scold Qing Yu. He smiled and said to Gu Huayu, oh, I misunderstood. I thought Yan Ran invited my brother to take a car. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Rebirth of Space, the lucky girl from a farm family. Author, he would fire every. Chapter 259. Chapter 259 Gambling House. Gu Huayu said calmly, you are overthinking it. I have mysophobia and don't like others touching my things. After saying that, Gu Huayu got into the car. King Yu waited for Gu Huayu to sit firmly before driving forward. Hua Ruiming saw Gu Huayu's car leaving and walked quickly to the door, jumped into the car and said, hurry, follow the princess car. King Yu was not sure what Gu Huayu meant. He turned around and saw Hua Ruiming's car following him, and reminded Gu Huayu, Princess, Commander Hua's car is coming up. Gu Huayu said, it's okay, let him follow. We want to explore Long Shadow Guard's background, and it's easiest to start from Hua Ruiming. King Yu said, that's right. However, Commander Hua's eyes are wrong when he looks at the princess. The princess had better be careful. King Yu thought for a while and expressed his worries. Gu Huayu nodded and said, "Okay, I'll be careful." Huaruiming followed Gu Huayu to Huayu Pavilion. Gu Chengwan warmly received Huaruiming and took him upstairs and downstairs. When going out, Huaruiming had 2 bottles of Wanju and a bottle of Nuaniang in his hand. Gu Huayu was a little speechless about Gu Chenjuan's practice of selling to everyone she met. Gu Chengwan raised her eyebrows at Gu Huayu and said, "Be full of enthusiasm when treating guests. This is what you taught me." Gu Huayu was speechless and only said, "You're doing a good job, keep up the good work." After leaving Huayu Pavilion, Huaruiming asked, "Yan Ran, where do you want to go?" Gu Huayu asked back, "What's fun in the capital?" Gu Huayu's words stopped Huaruiming. The places he went to were nothing more than the fireworks and willow alleys, and the Gulan wine shop. Apart from these places, he couldn't think of any interesting places. But these are not places that girls should go to. Seeing that Huaruiming didn't reply, Gu Huayu asked, "Is it possible that there are no interesting places in the city?" "How could it be? The capital is so big and there are so many fun places. I was just thinking about where it would be better to take you," Huaruiming defended. Gu Huayu thought about it. In a large capital city, there are naturally so many interesting places, so it is normal for Huaruiming to have a hard time choosing. Gu Huayu's urging made Huaruiming anxious, and in a hurry he said casually, "Yan Ran, how about we go to the Lucky Casino?" LV Zigzun took him to the Lucky Casino twice. There were many kinds of games, and he felt so good when he won money. The more Huaruiming thought about it, the more he thought this place was good. Gu Huayu couldn't understand Huaruiming's brain circuit. How did he think of taking her to the casino? Gu Huayu looked at Huaruiming with a proud face and didn't come back to her senses for a long time. Gu Huayu looked at the second-rate Huaruiming and asked, "Where did you say you were going?" Huaruiming only thought that Gu Huayu was a country old man who didn't know what a casino was, so he explained patiently. "Let's go to the Lucky Casino, Yan Ran. Let me tell you, that place is very fun. You can play a lot of tricks and it's very exciting if you go and play. I guarantee you will like it." Huaruiming's eyes gleamed as he spoke. Gu Huayu asked, "Do you often go there to play?" Huaruiming said matter-of-factly, "Is that the case? Zigzun took me there twice." Finished. Huaruiming was afraid that Gu Huayu didn't know who Lu Zigzun was, so he explained, "Zigzun is Zi Qin's second brother and the second master of the British Duke's family." Gu Huayu took the words. "No need to explain, I know he is your second brother-in-law and the second brother of your wife, Lu Ziqiu." Huaruiming nodded, "Yes, that's him. Zigzun often goes there to play and is very familiar with it. He took me there twice and it was really fun." Gu Huayu asked, "Are there women going to the casino?" "Yes, why not? Those who open gambling houses and do business hope that people will play, and then they will make money. Women are also human beings, and the money in a woman's hands is also money. Why don't they let women play with it?" Gu Huayu didn't expect that Daxing's folk customs would be so open that women could enter and exit gambling houses. This made her a little curious and wanted to open her eyes. Gu Huayu looked down at her outfit and said, "Wait for me here." After saying that, Gu Huayu turned around and entered the shop. Huaruiming asked, "Yan Ran, what are you doing?" Gu Huayu responded casually, "Take the silver." Huaruiming raised his voice and said, "No, I brought the money, and I'll treat you to it. No need to invite me, just wait, I'll be out in a minute." Gu Huayu went to the house in the backyard, changed into men's clothes, and casually took a pile of banknotes and put them in her pocket. Huaruiming looked at Gu Huayu, who looked like a handsome young man, and said, "You don't need to change your clothes. There are real women in the gambling house." Gu Huayu nodded, "I know. Men's clothing is more convenient. Is it far? How can we get there? Huaruiming said, the lucky gambling house is on Yanglu Street. Go through the alley on the opposite side and turn 2 more corners to reach it. Gu Huayu nodded and said, let's go. Princess, the younger one is with you. Qingyu spoke up in time. Huaruiming said disgustedly, as long as I follow Yan Ran, what are you doing? Qingyu didn't look at Huaruiming at all, but looked at Gu Huayu waiting for a reply. Gu Huayu nodded and said, follow me, remember to call me Ju yet. Qingyu leaned forward and said, yes, Master Ju, I have written it down. Huaruiming looked at Gu Huayu and asked in confusion, why do you want him to call you Master Ju? Gu Huayu said, nothing, I like it. Let's go. You lead the way. Ensu walked forward sensibly, little one, lead the way. A few people crossed the street and got into the alley, then turned left and right to Yanglu Street. It's right in front, Yan Ran, have you seen it? It's right in front. Huaruiming leaned closer to Gu Huayu and raised his hand to point not far away. Gu Huayu took a step aside in time to avoid Huaruiming's touch. She turned around and glared at him and said, speak nicely and don't come close to me. I hate contact with outsiders. Huaruiming was not angry and said with a smile, am I an outsider? I am your brother. Gu Huayu said seriously, put away your playful smile. If you want to live a smooth life, don't touch my bottom line. Huaruiming wanted to take the opportunity to mop up the trouble, but failed and was warned by Gu Huayu with a stern face. Huaruiming had seen a lot of smiling faces in the flower house, and seeing Gu Huayu's stern face warning him was particularly touching. If it wasn't on the street, he would have really wanted to reach out and pinch her little face. Gu Huayu saw that Huaruiming didn't speak, so she just assumed that Huaruiming had listened and walked towards the gambling house. Huaruiming was about to catch up when he was grabbed by Ensu. Huaruiming looked back at Ensu and asked, what's wrong? Ensu whispered, sir, the princess is not someone to be trifled with. Don't provoke her. Huaruiming glared at Ensu and said in a low voice, Luzuo, do what you should do, and you don't have to worry about my affairs. From the front, Qingyu whispered, Princess, Commander Hua doesn't seem to have listened to your words. Gu Huayu said, don't worry about him, be polite first and then fight. If he doesn't change his character, I will make him regret it. Don't worry, I can't bear the loss. Qingyu nodded and said, yes, I understand. Huaruiming caught up and said, Yan Ran, wait for me. Commander Hua is here, please come in. When the waiter saw Huaruiming, he came out with a smile on his face. Huaruiming nodded and walked in with official steps. As he walked, he said to the waiter, today, I will bring my brother over to see if there is anything interesting. Please tell my brother. The waiter immediately walked to Gu Huayu's side. After bowing in greeting, he began to introduce Gu Huayu in a low voice. In the 21st century, Gu Huayu was taken to the gambling city of beautiful country by Hua Jinlin to have a look. She was not new to the waiter's introduction. She was curious about the folk customs of this era and wanted to see what women of this era looked like when gambling. Gu Huayu looked around the lobby and saw several long tables placed in the room, with people crowding around the tables. Some are sitting, some are standing with their hands folded in front of their chests, and some are putting one leg on the bench. People have different postures, their eyes are fixed on the dice cup on the table, and they are shouting big, 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 big. Small, small, small. The shouts were so loud that they almost knocked off the roof. The dealer opened the dice cup, some people screamed with excitement, while others sighed in frustration. Gu Huayu did not see the gambling woman, but unexpectedly met Lu Zixun from the British government and Wan Changquan from the Wanfu. The two of them were talking to a man wearing an ultramarine gown. Lu Zixun and Wan Changquan looked sideways at them and did not see them. Gu Huayu turned to Huaruiming and said, "Your brother-in-law is over there." Huaruiming looked over and said, "Let's go over and have a look." Gu Huayu said, "When they ask, they say I am Master Ju, don't expose me." "Okay, let's go," Huaruiming agreed. Huaruiming walked over quickly and called with a smile, "Zixun, Uncle Wan." Gu Huayu felt that the ultramarine man looked familiar, but couldn't remember where she had seen him. Qingyu saw the ultramarine man and said in surprise, "Isn't this the man who followed Yang Jian yesterday?" Gu Huayu narrowed her eyes slightly and looked at the ultramarine man again. There were many people yesterday, so her attention was on Kui Mingqing and the others, and she didn't pay too much attention to others. After being reminded by Qingyu, there seemed to be some impression in my mind. Hearing Huaruiming's voice, the three people who were talking stopped and looked over. Gu Huayu saw a flash of panic in the ultramarine man's eyes when he saw Huaruiming, and couldn't help turning her head to look at Huaruiming. Huaruiming looked natural and bowed his hands to Lu Zixun and Wan Changquan. Apparently, he didn't know the ultramarine man. Sure enough, Huaruiming straightened up and asked, "Who is this?" Lu Zixun introduced, Su Shuxia, the second shopkeeper of the Good Luck Gambling House, and Huaruiming, the commander of the Long Shadow Guard. When Lu Zixun talked about the commander of the Long Shadow Guard, his voice became stronger and there was a bit of pride in his tone. Su Shuxia bowed towards Huaruiming and said, "Hello, Commander Hua, I'm Su Shuxia. The second shopkeeper of Good Luck Gambling House, welcome Commander Hua." Huaruiming cupped his hands casually, and then pulled Lu Zixun to talk. Su Shuxia bowed and said sensibly, "Here are you, please, I'll go and get busy first. If you two want anything, just come to the counter and pick it up." Lu Zixun and Wan Changquan cupped their hands towards Su Shuxia and said, "Thank you very much, shopkeeper Su Er. I won't use it today. I'll trouble shopkeeper Su Er next time." "You're welcome, I wish you guys a good time." After saying that, Su Shuxia left. Lu Zixun turned to look at Huaruiming. "Why are Wenda here? Do you have any silver? Give me 100 taels of silver first, and I will return it to you another day." Lu Zixun asked politely first, and then changed the topic to money. Gu Huayu understood and looked at Lu Zixun with a deep look in her eyes. It was obvious that these two people had just asked the shopkeeper to borrow money. Huaruiming asked, "What? Have you finished losing?" Lu Zixun said angrily, "The point is a bit backward today. When I bought it big, it opened small. When I bought it small, it opened big, and the handle was not smooth." Huaruiming scolded, "Why don't you come back when things don't go your way? Don't you know how to stop?" Lu Zixun replied in a low voice, "It's not that I hope I can win something back in the next round. How much money did you bring? Give me 100 taels first. I don't believe in this evil. Today I can lose again and again." Huaruiming took a banknote from his arms and handed it over. "Here, if you lose even this 100 taels, you should stop playing today." Lu Zixun took the banknote, thanked him, and pulled Wan Changquan into the crowd nearby. From beginning to end, Lu Zixun didn't even look at Gu Huayu. After Lu Zixun left, Huaruiming turned around and asked, "Yan Ran, are you playing?" Gu Huayu said, "You play, I'll take a look first." Huaruiming said, "Okay, I'll go see Zixun. You can do whatever you want. If you want to play, come and find me." Gu Huayu nodded, "Okay, you go." Huaruiming turned to Qingyu and said, "Protect your master." After Huaruiming left, Gu Huayu said to Qingyu, "Pay attention to that shopkeeper Su Er." Qingyu leaned forward and said, "Okay, I understand. Mr. Ju, do you want to play?" Gu Huayu said, "You're here, it's not good if you don't play. Let's find a position with a good view and play a few games." Gu Huayu knew that in a place like a casino, as long as you enter, you will be watched secretly. The two chose a corner with a good view. Gu Huayu asked King Yu to sit down and stood beside King Yu. King Yu turned around and looked at Gu Huayu in fear. "Master, come and play." Gu Huayu winked at King Yu and told him to sit still and said in a low voice, "If I sit down, my view will be blocked." King Yu understood. He took out a piece of ingot and put it on the table with peace of mind, and bought a big one. Gu Huayu's attention was on Su Shuxia's side. Su Shuxia stood by the cabinet and made calculations for a while, looked up at them, and then waved to the waiter. The waiter immediately walked over and bowed to Su Shuxia. Su Shuxia leaned her head over and whispered to the waiter, "Hurry up and deliver a letter to the big shopkeeper. Tell him that the commander and Princess Yanran are coming to the casino. Hurry up, so that the big shopkeeper doesn't come and bump into you." Gu Huayu was not surprised that Su Shuxia could recognize herself. Why did he ask the waiter to inform the chief shopkeeper? Who is the boss of this gambling house? Gu Huayu raised her head and looked at Su Shuxia. Su Shuxia was looking at her. Seeing her looking over, Su Shuxia turned her head away and looked away. Gu Huayu looked away and saw King Yu took out another ingot of silver from the money bag and put it on the table. Huayu asked, "Lost?" King Yu turned to look at Gu Huayu and said helplessly, "This is the third one." Gu Huayu smiled and said, "It's okay. If we lose this one, we'll go back." "Okay," King Yu nodded in agreement. After King Yu finished speaking, the dealer revealed the points. King Yu stood up with relief and said, "You lost, let's go." Gu Huayu smiled and said, "It's not easy for you to lose 3 times in a row. Let's go." King Yu looked around the place and did not see Huaru Iming, so he asked, "Where is Commander Hua? Do you want to call him?" End of this chapter. The Rebirth of Space, the Lucky Girl from a Farm Family. Author, He Would Fire Every. Chapter 260. Chapter 260 Stay Away from Him. Gu Huayu looked around and said, "Huaru Iming's entourage is over there, go over and say hello, and then we'll leave." King Yu whispered, "The princess is waiting for you here, and you will come as soon as you go." Gu Huayu nodded and waited for King Yu to say hello. She looked over at the counter and saw Su Shuxia looking at her. Gu Huayu raised her head unexpectedly, leaving Su Shuxia unable to escape, so she had to purse her lips in embarrassment. Gu Huayu looked away expressionlessly and did not interact with him. Waiting for King Yu to come over, Gu Huayu turned around and walked towards the door. "Let's go." King Yu nodded and followed Gu Huayu out of the lucky gambling house. "Yanran, are you leaving? No more fun." Gu Huayu looked back at Huaru Iming who was chasing him. "You are playing your own game, why are you chasing me? I promised to play with you, how could I make a mistake? If you don't like it here, let's go somewhere else." With that said, Huaru Iming walked forward. Gu Hua said, "Let's wait another day. I'm tired today, so I'll go back." After speaking, Gu Huayu waved her hand, "Goodbye, I wish you a good time." Huaru Iming still wanted to stay, but when he saw that Gu Huayu had decided to leave, he raised his voice and said, "I will go to the house to find you tomorrow." "Okay," Gu Huayu said without turning around. Huaru Iming saw that Gu Huayu agreed, and added happily, "Then let's see you tomorrow morning." Gu Huayu raised her hand and did not look back. King Yu asked, "Princess, do you want him to come tomorrow?" Gu Huayu nodded, "Since we can't find a breakthrough, let's try it from him. Go and find out who is the big boss of this gambling house. Who is the owner? I'll send the princess back first, and then we'll check." Gu Huayu said no more. After that time outside the city, no one allowed her to go out alone. The two returned to Huayu Pavilion. When Gu Huayu entered, she almost bumped into Li Tao who was going out. Li Tao recognized Gu Huayu at a glance. After looking him up and down, he asked, Why are you dressed like this? Where have you been? Gu Huayu replied casually, good luck gambling house. Hey, are you okay with this? Li Tao turned around and followed Gu Huayu, mocking him. Gu Huayu waved her hand and said, don't mention it. Commander Hua took me there. Are you here to see me for anything? You sit down in the living room and let me change my clothes. It's a hot day and I'm covered in stinky sweat. It's killing me. After saying that, Gu Huayu went straight to the backyard to wash and change clothes. When Gu Huayu came out, he saw Shi Yamei and Li Tao sitting in the living room chatting. Gu Huayu asked, why is Yamei here? Did you two make an appointment today? Shi Yamei looked up at Gu Huayu and scolded, you girl, if I don't come to find you, you will never remember to find me. Right. Li Tao echoed, that's how she is. In the past few days since she came to the capital, when have I not come to look for her? She will always take the initiative to look for others. Gu Huayu walked over and sat down, and said with a smile, one of you is going to school, and the other is busy making wedding clothes? I am going to disturb you, am I not ignorant? As for you two, what a good day it is today, what are you two doing? It was a coincidence that we came together. Li Tao looked at Gu Huayu and asked, did something happen to you? Gu Huayu shook her head, no, why do you ask that? Li Tao looked at Gu Huayu suspiciously and asked, really? No, Gu Huayu shook her head firmly. Well, why did the emperor give you the fish talisman? Li Tao wondered. Gu Huayu looked at Shi Yamei, then at Li Tao, and asked, are you two here about the fish charm? Li Tao said, what are you talking about? What do you mean you are here for the fish talisman? I am here for your safety. Do you know how Lulu obtained the fish talisman back then? Gu Huayu straightened up and asked, where did Lulu's fish charm come from? Li Tao said, you got it after being bullied by a group of people until your nose and face were swollen. Were you bullied too? Shi Yamei took over the words, who can bully her? It would be better if she didn't bully others. At this moment, several adults in the East Yamen of Jingzhoufu City were probably about to cry. Xiao, tell me the truth. Does the emperor giving you the fish talisman have something to do with what happened in the east of the city yesterday? Li Tao looked at Shi Yamei, at the yamen in the east of the city, where are Kui Mingqing and Kui Shaiyin. Shi Yamei nodded and said, that's him. He relies on his own backing to dominate the yamen. He is very annoying. Hago can't stand him the most. By the way, Hago asked me to tell you that when you went to the yamen yesterday, he went to Tong County for business and was not in the yamen. I heard someone talk about it when I came back in the evening. Hago said that since the half day is yours, you should have told him earlier. He works in the government office in the east of the city, so he should be taken care of. Li Tao was confused when he heard it, and asked, how can I talk in half a day? What happened yesterday? Why didn't I understand a word? So, Gu Huayu briefly talked about what happened yesterday. After hearing this, Li Tao said, so that's it? Kui Mingqing is from the line of Wang Xiang. This person is very good at flattering horses, and he is very hypocritical. Fortunately, the emperor gave you the fish talisman. Otherwise, Kui Mingqing suffered a loss yesterday, and he may not know how to retaliate against you. Shi Yamei nodded repeatedly, yes, yes, Hago said the same thing when he came back. Kui Mingqing is a man of great official authority. On the surface, he is smiling, but on the inside, he is very evil. In the yamen, those who had no connection with the family were bullied to death by him. How did you know? After Shi Yamei finished speaking, he turned to look at Li Tao and asked him how he knew Kui Mingqing's personality. Li Tao replied, how do you know? I saw it with my own eyes. In the first month of last year, I took a group of boys for a walk on the street. In the first month of the year, during the Chinese New Year, boys play together, and they always play firecrackers or something like that. It happened that Kui Mingqing went to the Prime Minister's mansion to pay New Year's greetings on that day. Huang Bowen threw a firecracker near his carriage, which was at least 1 foot away. 1 foot is far. Do you know how far it is? It's so far from my place to the door. None of us took it seriously. As a result, Kui Mingqing got off the carriage, blushing and shouting, asking who threw the firecrackers. Stand up for him quickly. Huang Bowen was an honest and timid man. When he saw Kui Mingqing yelling, he stood up tremblingly in fright. Kui Mingqing looked Huang Bowen over and asked whose family Huang Bowen belonged to. After Huang Bowen informed Kui Mingqing, he apologized to Kui Mingqing. Even if Huang Bowen did something wrong, everyone apologized. It's the new year, so we have to be merciful and merciful, right? Besides, how big of a deal is this? But Kui Mingqing actually asked Huang Bowen to kneel down for him in the street. Gu Huayu hated this kind of bullying, so she immediately took over the words, "I'll go, this is too bullying. A man has gold under his knees, and he kneels to the sky and the ground to his parents. Who is he? Why should others kneel to him?" Shi Yamei said, "This person is so hateful." Who is Huang Bowen? Li Tao took a sip of tea and continued, "Huang Bowen is a brother of mine. He is about the same age as me. He lives in the back alley of my house. His father, Huang Kaida, is a clerk in the Ministry of Rights. His family has no background." Kui Mingqing met Huang Bowen. If the family has no power, he will openly bully him. Gu Huayu asked, "Is this Huang Bowen kneeling down for him?" Li Tao shook his head, "No, Huang Bowen was so frightened that he was about to kneel down, but another brother and I grabbed him and stopped him from kneeling down. I went to Kui Mingqing to argue with me. He asked me whose house I belonged to, but I refused to tell him and wanted to drag him to Jingzhou House for review. At first he threatened me in a coaxing way, thinking that I was scared. I was not afraid of him. I threw a firecracker beside his carriage, which scared his horse and made him neigh." Seeing Li Tao stop, Shi Yamei asked, "What happened next?" Li Tao continued, "Later, his servant learned from onlookers that I was the second son of the Li family, and told him quietly. Kui Mingqing's servant looked at me and left angrily." Gu Huayu asked, "What is the relationship between Kui Mingqing and Wang Xiangfu?" "I only know that Kui Shangshu of the Ministry of Personnel is his cousin who has not been in the 5th service." Li Tao looked at Gu Huayu with admiration and said, "Isn't it good?" Not long after coming to the capital, all these relationships were found out. Kui Mingqing worshipped Wang Xiang as his teacher, and he can be regarded as Wang Xiang's disciple. Gu Huayu nodded, "So that's it?" Li Tao asked, "Why did you think of taking half a day off? You even started a ring with Giun." "That's not right, doesn't Giun Pavilion belong to Huaru Iming? You brought this matter to the Yamen yesterday, and he came to take you to the casino today. Does he want to take revenge on you? You are also brave. If he invites you, you dare to go out." Shi Yamei lowered his head to sip the tea. After listening to Li Tao's words, he spat it out, and then started coughing continuously. Gu Huayu turned around and patted her back. "How are you? Are you feeling better?" Li Tao poured another cup of tea for Shi Yamei and handed it over. "Here, have a sip of tea." Shi Yamei took the tea and drank 2 sips before her throat felt better. Shi Yamei put down the teacup, looked up at Gu Huayu, and asked, "He actually took you to the casino? Is that a place where good people go? Xiao, you too, do you dare to go to that kind of place?" Gu Huayu smiled and said, "I'm just curious, so I went to take a look." "Don't be nervous." Li Tao said, "I will accompany you when I go back next time. Huaruiming is not in the right mind, so stay away from him. Didn't you open a rouge shop? Why are you opening a restaurant again? No, you spent half of your free time near Giun Pavilion. Did you do that on purpose? Xiao, are you busy doing something big? I have to say that Li Tao is sensitive enough. With just a few words, he can accurately capture the subtle relationship between her and Gyung. When Li Tao asked, Gu Huayu hesitated to tell them the truth. It's not that she doesn't trust them, it's that she's afraid of causing trouble to them. Li Tao saw Gu Huayu's hesitation and asked seriously, aren't Chi-san and I worthy of your trust? Gu Huayu smiled and said, how come, I don't want you to get involved. You also know that my family's affairs must involve a lot of people. Shi Yamei was a chivalrous person, so naturally he couldn't hear Gu Huayu's words, and said unhappily, Xiao treats me as an outsider. Li Tao prides himself on being the boss of the gangsters in the capital, and his reputation as a gangster is righteous. Li Tao took the words and said, Shi-san is right. Do you treat us as outsiders? Gu Huayu apologized, how could it be? You two are my good friends, always have been. Just because we are friends, I can't help but think about you. Before Gu Huayu could finish speaking, Li Tao interrupted her, you talk a lot. If we are good friends, tell us what you have done and see if we can help. Shi Yamei nodded, yes, Xiao, if you think that we are your friends, you will tell us what you are going to do. Li Er and I are not people who are greedy for life and afraid of death. Gu Huayu looked at Li Tao and then at Shi Yamei. Seeing that the two of them were staring at her closely, she could only say, okay, I'll tell you both that it's okay. However, you two cannot take risks for me, and the principle is to protect yourselves in everything. Li Tao nodded, I understand what you mean. Life is precious, so if you keep the green hills, you won't have to worry about running out of firewood. I will protect myself whenever I encounter danger in the future. Gu Huayu nodded and looked at Shi Yamei. Shi Yamei looked at Gu Huayu, then at Li Tao, raised 3 fingers of his right hand and said, I promise that if I encounter danger in the future, I will protect myself. Gu Huayu and 2 others expressed their stance, saying, my parents died in mysterious circumstances. This case has been pending for more than 10 years without any results. I want to find out the truth and give my parents an explanation. Li Tao asked sensitively, do you suspect that your father's death is related to Huaru Iming's father? Gu Huayu did not answer, but asked, if you were me, would you be so suspicious? Li Tao thought for a while and nodded, yes. When it comes to murder cases, it's either accidental, emotionally hurt, or seeking money, or killing someone for money. Isn't that the case? Moreover, it's just seeking power and blocking others' promotion path. At this point, Li Tao paused for a moment, looked up at Gu Huayu and said, in your parents' case, rule out the first 2 possibilities. Leave the last 2 possibilities, your father will take possession of both wealth and power. To make money, Lan Jingwei has a cornucopia of treasures like Baofeng Bank and Giun Pavilion. It is normal for some people to be concerned about it. Before Li Tao could finish speaking, Shi Yamei interrupted him and looked at Gu Huayu with shock on his face, so, Huasu is the enemy who killed your father? No wonder my mother-in-law scolded Huasu when she mentioned it in those years. Gu Huayu said, I can't say that, but it is possible. There is no evidence now, and I have to find evidence. Shi Yamei suddenly thought of something and asked, did you approach Huaru Iming to find out the truth? Yes, after 15 years, my house suffered another fire that year. Many clues were lost, and it was not easy to investigate Gu Huayu's side. Li Tao comforted him, this matter happened after a long time, so it will definitely not be easy to investigate. Take your time. Later, I will try to go to Dali Temple to help you check the files from that year, and see if I can find any clues. Shi Yamei thought for a while and said, I heard from my mother that when your house was flooded, my father got the letter and rushed to the scene with his people first. The eldest brother was working with Dad at that time, and he was also the first to come to your house. I'll go back and ask my elder brother if he can ask anything. Gu Huayu bowed to the two of them and thanked them. Thank you. I'm investigating this matter secretly. You just need to know about it. You can't tell others, so as not to get into trouble. Li Tao nodded. Don't worry, I know the severity. Gu Huayu thought of something and asked, Li Er, do you often go to the back streets? End of this chapter.